Singularity. Lord of Mysteries Chapter 1-20. Memories and Pathway. Max took in a deep breath as he regained consciousness in a damp and prickly bed. Straining a bit, he was finally able to open his eyes, but what he saw horrified him to the core as he instantly realized where he was, and prepared for the worst. I suppose I deserve an ending like this right after coming to life. However, even after a few seconds, nothing happened and Max opened his eyes once more, only to see the same giant red moon he had seen before, turning everything in his surroundings an unsettling hue of crimson. Quickly, Max thought of something and grinned in relief, only to realize that he did not have any teeth. All of a sudden, two sets of memories flooded into his mind, one indefinitely larger than the other, clashing with the already existing memory of his precious life. One memory was of the original owner of the body, whose name was Max Verstappen. He was a 15-year-old teenager with a passion for machinery and engineering, and a dream to become a priest for the god of steam and machinery. Unfortunately, he was one day kidnapped from his house by some goons who were actually involved with slave trading and were on their way to take him from the Intis Republic to Backland. Thankfully, some individuals who claimed to be from the Church of the Evernight Goddess stopped the carriage of slavers in a small town called Tingen and killed off all the slavers. Unfortunately, as soon as this happened, two individuals in red robes suddenly attacked and killed the believers of Evernight who had just freed Max using methods beyond that of normal humans. After this, they proceeded to maim the bodies of the dead, including Max's own, by removing all their teeth as well as their pinky fingers from their right hands. He assumed them to be from the Aurora Order, but Max was not supposed to know this knowledge, and Max had also already died. This is where the second set of memories came into play. These memories belonged to Samuel, an ex-student with a master's degree in business administration that he got while his whole planet was in lockdown due to a certain illogically fast-spreading pandemic originating from a certain bat-eating country. Anyway, he had not paid any attention to university and somehow passed the postgraduate degree with good marks to get a decent job. Unfortunately, his workplace had no lack of enemies who wore polite smiles on their faces all day, only to bite you in the back constantly. It reached the point that Samuel was almost fired, but after begging his boss for a few days, he was allowed to remain in the office. Since that day, Samuel made up his mind and completely changed his behavior. He no longer cared about making friends but also made sure to flatter his superiors in various ways. He only did the work he was told to do by his superiors, and not helping out his coworkers. Over time, he became more efficient in the art of manipulating others and removed all competition from his path to advancing, inevitably resulting in the firing of countless employees who stood in his way. One day, when he was about to be promoted to director of the financial department, a man jumped in front of his car. Swiveling sharply, Samuel had managed to avoid the man, but ended up on the wrong side of the road, and hit another car that was headed straight for him. Thankfully, he kept his seatbelt on at all times while driving, not to avoid accidents like this since they had never actually happened to him, but to avoid being caught by the police and having a record of misconduct or something similar from staining his reputation. The seatbelt along with the timely deployment of the airbag had saved his life. However, the accident still caused him a concussion as well as severe bleeding from the glass fragments everywhere. The door was suddenly opened, and after removing the seatbelt, Samuel was dragged out by a man of similar stature to himself. However, his vision was blurry and he could not see anything clearly, nor could he hear anything that's sensible. But after a few seconds, his hearing was the first to return to him and he heard the words of the man who had saved him by dragging him out of the car. "You are probably wondering how I knew it was you. I still remember that time, Mr. Samuel, when you told me to work together with Jack on the women empowerment advertisement. I was so happy to be recognized by a senior and had worked so hard with Jack. But then, our project was not only cancelled but we were also fired for trying to steal our co-workers' hard work. Do you know what Jack and I had been through? So naturally, we both investigated everything, and after a few months of searching, we found the group responsible for not only stealing our work and taking credit for it, but also putting false charges on us with our to get us fired. But we were not able to talk with them since they avoided us like the plague. Well, until a month ago when you had them fired. That is how I uncovered the truth, that you were behind everything. From the beginning, and not only had you used us and got us fired, but you had done it for the simple reason of asserting the chain of command on juniors. Do you know what happened to me? Well, nothing except for the fact that I could not get a proper job and had to work part-time. But I could still survive on it. But Jack, his father was dead and his mother in the hospital. How was he supposed to pay the hospital bill with just part-time jobs like me? So, Mr. Samuel, can you guess what happened next? His mother was removed from the hospital that could actually treat her Huntington's disease to a public hospital, which then sent her to an old age home for the retired, where she retired from life not long after. In depression, or whatever he was going through, Jack also followed her, perhaps in hopes of meeting her once again. And now, I am the only one remaining. An orphan with no family or friends other than those who are dead or who I never knew about and are dead to me. Well, I had only one thing left to live for. Revenge. From you. By now, a considerable crowd had gathered around the crash, and many had already called for ambulances. More importantly, Samuel's vision had finally recovered and he recognized the man before him immediately. He was the one who had stood in front of his car. But then, from the story he had just been told, another image overlapped with the blonde bearded man in front of him. It was the image of an innocent and incompetent new employee whom he had used to assert his authority, while also removing those from the company who would not be able to achieve much and just waste away their lives at the shish tea pile that was his company. Not that he was defending his actions, they were most definitely ruthless, manipulative, disgusting and even cold-blooded. But he had not known about Jack's family condition, and nor had he cared. It was not his problem at the time, but from the tone of the man in front of him, perhaps it might turn out to become his problem very soon. Kai, Samuel spoke through coughs as he recognized the man in front of him, and noticed the crazed smile and blank eyes he had. Kai ginned more and he pulled out a gun from his jacket and blasted 7 holes into Samuel's face, hoping he would feel the pain of each shot, only to be disappointed that Samuel had died after the first 2. Immediately, the crowd around Kai ran in different directions to avoid this crazy murderer, hoping not to turn into a number on a news channel within hours. Meanwhile, Samuel had opened his eyes in the body of Max, and after a few moments, the memories of Max as well as a third smaller portion of memories flooded into his mind. This third portion of memories was the information of a particular pathway he had never heard of before. But the names used for each of these potions were absolutely terrifying, yet they gave Max a strange sense of thrill. Outer God, Unity, Singularity pathway related to gravitational force. Decay pathway related to weak nuclear force. Paradox pathway related to strong nuclear force. Spectrum pathway related to electromagnetic force. Among these different pathways, Max only had the potions and detailed information about the Singularity pathway, but it was the names of these sequences that were world-ending in nature. Singularity pathway related to gravitational force. Sequence 0, Singularity. Sequence 1, Celestial Entity. Sequence 2, Dark Sun. Sequence 3, Fate Deceiver. Sequence 4, Demon Destroyer. Sequence 5, Knowledge Purger. Sequence 6, Lightbringer. Sequence 7, Blinded Visionary. Sequence 8, Fool's End. Sequence 9, Beander. Pathway and Rituals. Many thoughts ran through Max's mind as he quickly understood the meanings behind the various sequences of his newly acquired pathway, and the ingredients for each were just as ridiculous as the abilities granted by each sequence. But more importantly, he was not being corrupted by the knowledge of this world, especially the cosmos and the outer deities who existed out there, beyond the protection of the gods of this planet. However, this was quickly dissipated by the single phrase, Outer God, Unity, which was the final form of his Singularity pathway, when combined with 3 other pathways, all of which did not exist in the original work of Lord of Mysteries, an incredible novel he had read during his days as a pandemic university student, and had also more recently decided to reread it to remember his past and his hardships, not long before he was killed. From the fact that the final form was not a great old one, but rather an outer god, it meant that he would ultimately become an outer god, if he was able to survive in this chaotic hellscape called a world, and thus add to the power of the outer gods. Why would they harm one of their own, when this being would ultimately end up siding with them? Or someone super strong was protecting him? Or perhaps, he was just immune to corruption from knowledge? The latter would be preferable, Max hoped in his heart. Sighing in relief for a moment, another thought crossed Max's mind and he couldn't help a shiver run through his body. If he was an outer god, then that would mean he would essentially be going against every other conventional pathway, including normal beanders of low and medium sequence, saints and angels, as well as king of angels, gods, and even great old ones like Klein Moretti or whoever followed him in the next novel released by the author. Perhaps it would be the ancient sun god in the form of Adam, or it might even be the Evernight goddess due to the relation between Klein and her. Anyways, this meant that his path was bound to go against Klein, the protagonist of this story. Now that I think about it, is this story truly fictional? Or is this the future that awaits Earth far in the future, or present? If so, then was the author a time traveler or was the work of the author turned into reality due to its influence? But then again, many other novels had had a far greater impact on society and there had been no signs of them becoming reality. Max mused but put the thought aside as he began thinking about his next moves. "'Tis world-ish really fcked up," only now did he recall he no longer had any reach and would not be able to speak. Well, this is going to make living in this world only that much harder. Max shook his head and decided to slowly get up from his position, finding out that the hole in his chest was slowly healing, just like the hole in Klein's head when he was first reincarnated. Feeling around with his tongue, Max was elated to notice that there were indeed teeth slowly growing inside his mouth, but the speed of recovery was pathetically slow. It would take at least 2 days for it to fully form, and the bloodied golf ball-sized hole in his chest should also take a few hours to form. Thus, Max did the only thing he could think of: run. He needed to get out of here before the official Beyonders arrived from the commotion of the missing Evernight believers. Being seen as a living corpse was a shortcut to being turned into a sealed artifact, or worse, just outright killed on the spot for appearing to have lost control or something. Taking a step, Max realized he was also not wearing any shoes nor was he wearing any clothes other than what could only be considered rags. Ironically, Samuel's memories came into this world the same way Max's body came into this world, almost completely butt naked. One time he was covered in blood and other liquids, this time he was covered in blood and brown and stiff cloth around his waist and torso. This did not stop Max as he moved swiftly onto the somewhat paved path which would help hide his tracks compared to walking on damp grass and leaving behind possible footprints. Of course, he made sure to walk in all directions from a single spot until all the wood, soil, water and grass was completely off his feet before he ran towards the forest away from Tingen City. At the very least, he would not want to get involved with the mess that Adam was building in Tingen City, and he did not want a blonde-haired perfectionist eldritch creature with an unfulfilled wish of becoming God Almighty, visiting him out of the blue. At least not until he was strong enough. Quickly entering the forest, Max did not stop moving and soon found himself lost. But that did not matter as he found a large tree, climbed up to a sturdy yet high enough branch, used some vines to secure himself to the branch and prevent him from falling while sleeping, and decided to go to sleep. Opening his eyes to the bright sunlight somehow directly entering his eyes through the thick foliage of the tree, Max tried hard but could not recall his dream. However, he was certain it was something important and made sure to check it out later. Taking in a deep breath, Max could already feel that the hold in his body was fixed, and his teeth were already halfway there. Perhaps by the end of the day, they would be fully formed. It appeared that reincarnation is similar to a full heal recovery option for the body. But compared to Klein's recovery, his was a lot slower, and perhaps this was the plot armor working its magic. The current date is May 3, 1348, around 1 year before Klein is brought into this world if Max remembered correctly. If he remembers correctly, it was around September of 1349 that the true creator tried to descend into Tingen City using his child. Max did not recall all the minor events that occurred throughout the story, only the overarching story since he had only been able to read the first 20 chapters before being killed. Thus, most of his memory came from the time he had read the novel many years in the past, which was a very long time ago. As such, even remembering things like dates was a shocking thing, and just went to show how good the novel was, since long-term memory is generally related to emotions and if you feel bored, you would not recall it no matter how many times you read something. But he also remembered one very vital aspect, that the entire Tingen City was under the control of Adam and his crazed pen that was in the hands of Ince Zangwil, who was either under the control of the pen or Adam himself. Either way, Tingen City was definitely the last place he would have wanted to be until Klein died for the first time and was revived by the Sephiroth called the Saphira Castle in the Grey Fog in the spiritual world. However, Max had already read his advancement requirements, which were absolutely bonkers, to be honest. His Sequence 9 Bender potion formula was rather simple, but in order to actually succeed, he needed to perform a ritual. The ritual involved him bending 3 different concepts without physically interacting with them. This could be matter or otherwise. For this, Max decided he would use a magnifying glass or monocle to bend light. Indeed, perhaps using the monocle would be useful in scaring off certain nosy individuals, was Max's reasoning, who saw nothing wrong with impersonating a certain mentally decapitated and deranged king of angels. Other than that, he would use a sheet of wood to bend the wind to go around him, and finally, he would use another sheet of wood to bend the path of flowing water, all while taking his potion. This potion was all fine and easy to collect, make, and ingest. The problem came with the next sequence. It just brought up more questions than answers. Sequence 8. Fool's End. Ritual. Ingest the potion after witnessing the end of the soon-to-be crowned fool Klein Moretti, without coming into contact with Angel of the Visionary Pathway Adam in Tingen City in 1349. Who in the fresh HLL has such specific rituals to advance? And why is it set up as though the potion itself knows the future? Who the HLL created this pathway for them to set up the advancement ritual so specifically? And what happens if he missed his opportunity for some reason? Would he be unable to advance forever? Stuck at sequence 9, hoping Klein survived his battle with the Celestial Worthy, the original owner of the title of Lord of the Mysteries in the Saphira Castle. Thankfully, after sequence 8, the rituals were no longer as specific, as though the person creating the pathway knew that Max's very existence would change the future plot in uncontrollable ways, and the result would be hard to predict. His future rituals all involved other pathways and ruining them in some way or the other, but at the very least, it was not so time or place specific as his sequence 8 ritual. Entering Tingen and looking for opportunities. Nodding to himself, Max got out of the tree, and immediately a wave of hunger overcame him. As it turned out, not only had he stayed hungry all night, but he had been living on a very meager diet of old bread and water while he was being transported. Looking at his hands and legs, Max could only sigh at the current state of his body. As it turned out, the full heal received from reincarnating only applied to recent wounds and injuries, and not something that had happened to him a long time ago. This would also mean that the scar on his right eye was likely still there, despite his vision not being affected. Based on the little he knew about the Lord of Mysteries world, Max could recall that Tingen City was near a river or water body of some sort at the very least, and so he took to his aching feet and went towards the city, trying his best to go around the scene of the crime since he did not know how many Nighthawks or other Beyonders were present. Upon nearing the city, he could faintly make out the flow of water and ignored the city in front of him and followed the sound of water, before finally reaching it. Unfortunately, it was a sewer outlet, letting out disgusting brown and green water into the ground just outside the city. How the horrendous smell had not invaded the entire city was a mystery, much like most of this world to common people. Max followed the flow of the water and soon found what he was looking for, a river down a slight hill, moving at considerable speed, but not enough to sweep someone off their feet. Sighing in relief, Max quickly made his way down and dove in, ensuring he was near the bank to get out at any moment, also making sure to stay clear of the sewage entering. As quickly as he could, Max washed all the blood of his body and clothes, while tearing away the bottom part of his rag of a shirt since it had a fist-sized hole in it as well as too much dried blood to be cleaned with just water. Once he was done with that, he quickly got out of the water and waited for his body to dry a bit before looking back into a calmer part of the river. Yup, I look exactly like I recall, except for the sunken cheeks and eyes as well as the dirt and blood in my originally silver hair. Dunking his head into the water again, Max rubbed vigorously to get rid of all dirt, and more importantly, all blood from his hair for a good few minutes before pulling it back out and wiping away the water from his eyes so he could open them. Before opening his eyes, he hoped in his mind that nobody was right in front of him, staring him down and waiting for him to open his eyes. Thankfully, he was right and truly nobody was there. It was just his paranoia getting the better of him. Sighing, Max looked at his reflection once more and confirmed that he looked almost normal other than the malnutrition. Getting up, Max made his decision very quickly. If I am going to have to go under the radar of Adam and the crazy psychopathic pen when Klein is dying, might as well enter the city as a normal human and not a beander. Once inside, I can earn enough money and purchase the materials for the Bender potion and consume it. I will have around a year to fully digest it and be prepared to consume the Fool's End potion. With that out of the way, Max did not directly enter the city and instead followed one of the considerably better paved paths away from the city until the path was surrounded by a considerable amount of green and yellow vegetation. Hiding behind one of these bushes, Max waited until he finally heard the rumbling of wood on stone and the cluttering of metal hooves on the same stone. Peering through the grass, Max noticed a black carriage pulled by two fairly well-fed horses. The driver was wearing brown clothes with a chauffeur's hat, a whip in one hand and the reins to the horses in the other. Thankfully, they were going considerably slowly, and Max waited for the windows inside the carriage to pass him before he sprinted out of the bushes, making as little noise as possible. Of course, to be extra cautious, he immediately jumped behind the carriage but did not touch it, only jogging right behind it. However, he knew his stamina would not allow him to keep this up for too long, so after waiting for a few seconds, he softly grabbed onto the metal poles that were holding the carriage together and put his feet onto what he assumed was the rear bumper of the carriage made of metal. Made it, Max celebrated slightly as he was finally on the carriage and he would no longer be straining his body until they reached the gates of the Tingen city. Thankfully, the one inside the carriage had some sort of reputation and the guards quickly allowed it to enter. One of the guards looked back at the moving carriage and noticed nothing wrong, so he just shrugged it off, completely missing the extra lump of shadow at the bottom of the carriage, holding on for dear life and hoping nobody saw him like this. The carriage passed through the city, and the path gradually turned from a nearly paved path to a completely paved and well-maintained road made of stone. Noticing this, Max understood that the carriage was heading to the more affluent areas of Tingen City, and a place that Max would absolutely love to avoid at the moment due to his current clothing. Taking in a breath for courage, Max lowered his head slightly to try and see if there were any people nearby, and to his horror, he was absolutely surrounded by people on all sides. Since when was the rich part of Tingen City so crowded? Since when was any part of Tingen City so crowded? Max exclaimed to himself as the carriage continued to rattle along the path. A few seconds later, Max took in a deep breath and steeled himself, before pulling himself to the right with all his might, throwing himself in between the two wheels, and directly into an alley that the carriage had just passed by. Thankfully, being in the rich neighborhood, there was nothing much in this dark alley for Max to crash into to produce much noise, so he just landed on the paved ground. Max exclaimed, trying to keep it as silent as possible as his weakened body impacted the ground, skidding a bit before coming to a stop due to the momentum of the carriage and his own throw so that he would not get caught by people, or under the rear wheel. A few seconds of cursing in his mind later, Max pushed his body upright. There were small scrapes on his elbows and knees, with faint amounts of blood pooling inside them, waiting to ooze out. Thankfully, it did not, and Max got back to walking. He recalled all the beggars from Max's original memories back in the Intis Empire who always found something to eat in the garbage cans of high-class restaurants. However, Max also knew that there were bound to be gangs who were in charge of these beggars and locations, and if he wanted food, he would need to fight against the stronger children, and then keep fighting up the ranks until he would end up having to kill the adults, and finally be noticed by the authorities, ultimately to end up as a criminal on the run. On the other hand, he could just go to a few of the cozy yet affluent shops that were not run for a profit, but for the passion of the shop owner and somehow ended up working out just the right balance. Of course, it would be difficult to find such a shop, but after a few shops, Max thought he found what he was looking for. Knock knock. Max waited for the sun to go down and all customers to leave as he noticed the owner, who was an elderly man, begin to clean up, before knocking to get the attention of the old man. The man looked at the door and saw a 15-year-old child with cuts and scrapes all over him, and clothes that could only be called rags. The child struggled for a moment before pushing the door open, causing the bell above it to jangle once. Only now did the old man get a good look at the child, and he was left with a bad taste in his mouth. The child had silver hair and red eyes, but more importantly, his muscles and fat had basically completely vanished, leaving what could only be described as a bag of bones with some skin holding it together. Of course, that was a slight exaggeration on the old man's part, but he was not used to seeing others in such dire situations, considering he had never been to the East Borough. On the other hand, Max sighed in relief as he noticed that the old man reacted exactly the way he wanted him to. He was confused, shocked, and most importantly, he felt pity, which was exactly what he needed at the moment. "Mister, do you have a job opening?" Max asked with his head hung low. He had used this method countless times on the elderly of his and other companies in senior positions, grasping on the pity they threw at him to stabilize his position and then use flattery and schemes to rise up steadily. Well, not Max, but rather Samuel, though the two were now one and the same. The old man was tuned for words at the sorry sight of the teenager whose body had been reduced to nothing but bare bones. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Getting a job and bathing. The old man was tuned for words at the sorry sight of the teenager whose body had been reduced to nothing but bare bones. Max was also looking at the old man to deduce exactly what kind of person he was. The old man had white hair neatly combed back with a hairline that would make most men half his age, including the original Samuel, spit blood from jealousy, and an incredibly well-groomed white beard. Well, although the name reminded him of a certain super powerful father, this old man actually had a white beard and not a plastic white mustache. His eyes were amethyst blue and he had an overall gentle face. He was wearing a three-piece suit with the jacket removed and put somewhere out of view, while an apron was covering most of his clothes at the front. His white sleeves were folded away to prevent them from coming into contact with the drinks or food he made. Despite it being closing hours, the white apron still looked almost entirely clean except for a few stains of drying water. Overall, Max got the impression of a caring old man with a certain not-so-civilian past based on the scarring he saw on his knuckles, who was now retired and running a cafe in the affluent part of the city, obviously not due to old age since his body seemed to be far too fit for it to hinder his activities. He either did something wrong, like pissing off the wrong individuals who had connections that go too high up, he was undercover, which was unlikely since it was too easy to guess he was not ordinary, or something tragic or traumatic happened to him or his close family. In just a few glances, countless thoughts ran through his mind, and Max could only hope the old man was not some ex-member of some gang who was on the run. Though this was unlikely, he would not have opened up a shop so brazenly. Thus, his gamble might end up paying off. As Max glanced around him through his hair, behind the detection of the old man, he spotted his most powerful weapon. A photo was placed behind the old man, just out of view of normal people, but Max, who was shorter than others and had been specifically looking for something personal about the old man, spotted it. It was the picture of the old man who looked much the same, with a woman who also looked old with white hair, but due to her fit figure and surprisingly few wrinkles, looked about half the age of the old man despite looking old. It was odd, but more importantly, there was no child in the photo. Instead, there was a separate photo frame behind this one with the photo of a newborn child. Clearly, the old man and the woman in the photo were too old to have a child, and if the child was still alive or living with them, they would have newer photos of him instead of the newborn one. I can milk this, Max exclaimed as he quickly thought of the most heartbreaking, gut-wrenching memories of both his lives, and as it turned out, most of such memories were of the original Max, and nor Samuel, who had spent most of his life in a sheltered society. He thought of the times he was bullied for not being tall, the times when those FC King thugs barged into their in-house workshop and beat up his father and mother, and himself. He thought about the countless times they would have to starve due to not having enough money, and finally thought about the final time when the thugs had had enough of father and mother not having enough money to give them, and decided to sell them off as slaves instead. Only, his parents fiercely resisted, getting killed in the process, and Max being shipped off in a cage all alone. He thought of the long journey while being all alone, with so little food and water to survive that at some times he could almost feel his parents calling out to him to just go to sleep and forget about everything. Instantly, countless tears began to fall from Max's face, but his mood had considerably soured. He did not want to remember this. In the case of Samuel, most of his bad memories were just regrets and injustices done to him at school, college, university and his company, which would cause him to form fake tears of self-pity. This time, however, he actually felt terrible, not only for losing both his parents but also for all the stuff Max had to go through while just being a teenager. Still, he was now Max, and Max was him, and wallowing in sadness would not yield much. Max looked up at the old man, who was frozen in shock at the tears flowing down the young child's face. "Please, mister, I have nowhere to go, and no one to go to," Max said, conveying his meaning to the old man that he had no family, trying to milk out as much pity from the old man and sympathy from him, especially considering he likely lost his child or even his wife. And just like that, Max found himself a comfortable job as a waiter at a cafe called Entwine Cafe, one that not only paid him a handsome amount, but also one that came with lunch, dinner, and a place to sleep included. It was essentially perfect for the time being. May 6, 1348 of the 5th epoch. It had been 2 days since Max had been taken in by old man Euxis. 3 nights for those whose views are so specific with maths that they went back in time to have a chat with Pythagoras. In this time, he had gotten Max a haircut. Well, it was a haircut in name. He had used what Max could only call sheep shears to remove all traces of his hair except lem from his scalp. He now looked like a fuzzy porcupine ball, but he felt it as at the very least a better look than the edgelord hairstyle he had before, coupled with his sickly body, made him look like a drug addict, an edge addict. Anyway, with his new haircut came a long and rough shower where he was treated like a piece of cloth, thrown around and scrubbed until he felt like his skin was peeling off. Somehow though, Max came out fresher than ever after the shower. His skin had become a bright pink, and his silver hair, despite being just average length, had a slight shine to it. With the food provided to him, Max also felt more energetic than ever before, though his condition had not improved too much. Old man Euxis said it would take him weeks if not months to return to normal, and Max just sighed. However, progress was still progress. At this time, as the sun rose and took out the blood-red moon from the throne of the sky, Max was looking at himself in the full-body mirror. His silver hair had become something similar to a fuzzy censoring to his head, and his red eyes stood out, especially considering the scar he got on his right eye, which had ended up not harming his eyes or even his eyelid, just creating a scratch stretching from his right cheek to his forehead. It appeared that old man Euxis definitely had some hidden past and had collected a considerable amount of money from it, since the full-body mirror in the guest room had a delicate crafted wooden frame around it which would at the very least cost quite the sum. Oh, the currency system here was horrendous. They had multiple names for sizes of currency to compensate for what Max could only assume to be the lack of knowledge among the general public about numbers, and the inability to produce banknotes of higher value. Or perhaps it was something else, but Max did not like this boorish method of counting money one bit. Still, this was what he got, and he could only shrug as he recounted his monthly salary was £5, not taking into account that he would be given a place to sleep, as well as lunch and dinner. This was about the best treatment a non-beander would get without becoming part of the official churches, or worse, MI9, which if Max recalled correctly was the semi-beander organization under the current King of Leon. Max was not fully sure about it. Taking in a deep breath, Max straightened out his white shirt and put on the coat, preparing to finally begin his job and start earning money. Let's go. Max nodded to himself as he left his room, waiting for old man Euxis to leave his room, before the two of them left the house and headed to open the Café Antoine for the day, locking the door to the small 2-story mansion in one of the normal neighborhoods of Tingen City. A day in Tingen and emotions. Waiter, kid, buzzcut, bones. At lunchtime, Max was utterly exhausted. He had not expected not only his body not being able to the morning and lunch rush, but also the mental exhaustion that came with maintaining a smile while all sorts of insults and mental jabs were thrown at him, intentionally and unintentionally by the customers. However, Max was a top-of-the-line flatterer who was able to maintain his smile and humble posture even while being insulted by the boss's useless child. Still, after so many hours of this, even Max was feeling mentally and physically tired. Speaking about insults, Max was still a little rough with Leon, the language used in the Leon Kingdom where he was currently. The original Max had been using Intis and ancient Faceac to communicate with his parents, and he had only learned a bit of Leon in passing. On the other hand, Samuel had only read The Lord of the Mysteries in English and only knew about the existence of these languages. Thankfully ancient Faceac was acting like a bridge for Max, connecting the little he knew about Leon with his own Intis language, allowing him to communicate with others in a horrendous amalgamation of Intis and Leon. Luckily old man Euxis had been able to understand his ancient Faceac and had only later told him about the problem. Thus, Max had been limiting his use of the Leon language while he was working, while also learning the language properly with old man Euxis. While eating his lunch at around 3 p.m., Max put away his current worries and began to think about his future tasks. Firstly, I need to fix up my Leon, as well as my accent. It should not be too difficult, but I should try to make it as authentic as possible to prevent any issues about someone finding out my real identity as a person from Intis due to my accent. Next, I will need money as well as weapons to defend myself. A gun would be preferable, but if I am seen with it by the authorities, it will cause many issues. especially since I am not a beander yet. On the other hand, a knife would be more concealed and there should not be anything wrong with carrying it around. Lastly, I need money not only for the weapon but also for the beander and Fool's End potion ingredients. None of them sounded like some mythical creature's body parts, and I can even recall some of them from the original novel, but not where or when in the novel. And all of this I need to accomplish without going to the beander gatherings since I am not yet a beander, plus it would put me under the detection of the official beander organizations that always keep a lookout in these meetings. I could try and go to the underground trading area, though I cannot seem to remember what it was called. But I remember it was a pretty famous place, so just asking the right people should ultimately lead me to it. But that brings us back to the original problem: money. I do not have enough time to sit back and collect hundreds of pounds from my job with Old Man Euxis. Even if I had the ability of Klein, as well as his plot armor, I would still need 1.5 months to fully digest my Sequence 9 Bender potion. This is unlikely, so to be safe, I should at the very least keep 6 months of separation between me ingesting the potion, and the descent of the true creator's spawn, which was around September of 1349 of the 5th epoch. The current date is May 6, 1348 of the 5th epoch, which gives me around a year and 1/3 to fully digest the potion. I will need to earn more money somehow, but before everything, I will need the condition of my body in top form. For that, I guess spending a few days or weeks with Old Man Euxis might not be too bad. Plus, I can plan out everything while doing so, and also secretly investigate the location of the black marketplace of Tingen City. With his plans made and lunch completed, Max drank the water he was given by the old man and could not help but sigh. Compared to Klein, although his original reincarnation was pathetic, his current situation was incredible. He had a stable job which did not involve getting into frequent life and death conflicts, and he also had knowledge about the future plot, locations and characters. The last of which should have already forced him to explode into a rain of blood or a horrendous abomination due to corruption. But whatever the reason was, he was still perfectly fine, and he was not strong enough to investigate the reasons behind this just yet. He had guesses, but nothing concrete, so he only shook the thought from his mind and stood up to wash his hands and plate. "Are you also done, little Max? Give me your plate," the old man said while smiling. Max on the other hand only shook his head before speaking in slightly better, but still utterly broken Leon, "No, I will wash mine." The old man did not reply, and instead moved a small stand towards the washbasin and told Max to climb up. After that, Max followed the old man's movements as he cleaned one of the plates used in the previous rush for serving customers. Max unknowingly felt an emotion deep within him he had long forgotten. It was not one of the emotions Samuel felt to his colleagues in his previous life or anyone in fact. Instead, it was something the original Max was a lot more familiar with, back when he used to live with his parents without knowing about the truth of their financial and overall situation. But Samuel worked hard to suppress this particular emotion so deep within him that even he would never be able to find it. After all, with his knowledge of the novel, he knew exactly what kind of world this was. Having someone like the old man close to him, especially considering his pathway and its peculiarities, would ultimately end in disaster for the old man and pain for himself. Yes, I am only using him to collect a bit of starting capital in order to venture into more fruitful businesses that will most definitely not be legal or moral in any way, shape or form. Max told himself while forcing himself to focus away from the old man towards his own plate. Cleaning it, Max put it away and returned to his duties as a waiter, cleaning the tables and restocking everything for the tables while the old man finished up on the dishes and began preparations for supper and dinner. Superpowers and discussion. Another few days passed in a flash, and Max's body had recovered a lot. Over the past week, Max had followed a strict schedule of waking up early in the morning and heading off to work, having some snacks and a glass of milk at Café Antoine as breakfast and beginning work. His work involved setting up the tables, cleaning them, taking orders and delivering orders. On the other hand, Old Man Euxis would prepare ingredients, take orders from Max and prepare the food before handing them to Max to deliver. All Max had to do was to get from point A, Old Man Euxis, to point B, the customer's table, as quickly as possible without damaging himself or the food. Good thing Max was good at this, being fast. The breakfast rush was considerable, but slowly people would trickle down until the even larger rush for lunch came. Thus, mornings were the time that Max and Old Max Euxis were the busiest. After the lunch rush, the cafe would be closed and Max and Euxis would have their own lunch and clean up the place, before reopening around 4 p.m. for high tea and finally dinner. Max also had to eat an extra meal before reopening around 4 p.m. in order to improve his malnutrition, which was compulsorily shoved down his throat by old Max Euxis even if he was full. After having dinner for themselves, and cleaning up, the two closed down the restaurant, and returned home, chatting about each other along the way. By the time they would reach home, walking the whole way, it was already considerably late at night and the two would go to sleep. Max finally had enough strength to confidently explore the outside alone, and since today was Monday, the only day of the week that the cafe was closed, Max took it up with the old man and was able to get himself a day off to explore. Before leaving, Max asked the old man, "Hey old man, you do know the streets are not a place for a child like me, right? Quote. You are already 15, although you look only 10 by your height, you are already 15. That is plenty, but I am too weak." "That you are. So, do you have a weapon I can use to protect myself from harm?" Quote. Old man Euxis did not reply for a good minute while staring down at the boy who he had essentially adopted off the streets. He ultimately did not say anything and instead just turned around and went to his room. From his location, Max heard a door opening, and instantly knew it was the only cupboard in his room being opened since he had heard it too often by now. Then he heard some shuffling of clothes and finally he heard a creaking sound, dissimilar to that of a rusted joint creaking, and more similar to wood being torn apart by brute force. Then he heard a deep thus as though something fell to the ground, and immediately Max assumed the worst, that someone had broken into old Ma Euxis' room and rushed in on impulse. H did not know what had caused such a reaction, but he knew that he needed to go in. What he would do facing another adult who was inside with his weak body, he did not know. But he knew that he needed to enter, so he did, grabbing the door handle and turning it with enough force that he knew something broke on the inside of the handle. However, the scene inside was completely different from what he had expected. His racing heart almost immediately calmed down as he finally realized what he had done. "Damn it, it seems I have become attached to this old man. Just what is this? It has barely been a week since I met him, and even if he took me in, I should not be so casely attached to another, and even less swayed by such emotions to rush into his room blindly." It was only now that Max's attention finally fell on the object on the floor that was the source of the thud. It was a wooden crate, with its cover opened and placed to the side. Inside was an array of nearly arranged weapons. From what Max could see, there were all sorts: short knives, pocket knives, cooking knives, butchering knives, throwing knives, even a machete-looking thing that reminded Max of a certain mustached actor. The weapons included various tools like hammer and shield, saws, tweezers and countless other things that would make someone be reminded of those interrogation scenes from movies where a villain spends an exorbitant amount of time explaining each tool to the hero, only so give the hero just enough time to escape without even a scratch. Among these weapons was a considerably unique one. A sword, but its entire blade was black in color, with red lines all along it reminding someone of veins. And the worst part, the moment he looked at it, Max felt as though the veins throbbed for a moment. Almost instantly Max felt a sense of fear from deep within his mind, but that feeling instantly vanished as the box was closed by the old man, who only sighed at the white face and petrified expression Max was currently making. Discreetly, however, the old man also noticed that Max had not fainted from fright, and only been scared stiff despite it being his first time coming into contact with that sword. The old man carefully put away the box and closed the cupboard behind him along with the door of the room as he took Max out of his room and into the living room, scatting him on the couch. After a while, Max was finally able to recover and noticed the old man's serious expression. He felt a feeling of guilt wash over him at this expression as he could only look down without saying anything. A long moment of silence followed before the old man took in a deep breath and began speaking. "Next time, knock before barging into someone's room unless they are your children." Max just nodded, not knowing why he was feeling this guilty, just kept silent, many thoughts swirling through his mind as he tried to understand what exactly was influencing him in such a way. Was it the old man himself? Or was it a beander he did not know about? Or worse, was it one of those unspeakable whose very knowledge will corrupt you? Anyways, you have two options now, Max. One is that we forget about everything and move on in life, living it to the fullest. The other is that I explain about that sword you saw there and about everything behind it. But this will likely put you in a particular amount of danger. Tell me, what do you choose? With the help of these words, Max finally snapped out of his thoughts and answered without thinking much. If you are talking about the superpowered people, then I already know about them from my life before coming to this city. I know that there are weak superpowered people and super strong superpowered people. Hearing these words, it was now Yuxis' turn to be unable to make sense of the situation and being frozen for a second at the unexpected answer. Only after a long moment did he return to normal and continue to speak. And what exactly were you doing before coming here? And how did you get here? Both Max and the old man had been avoiding this conversation for nearly a week due to various reasons, including the tight schedule they had as well as their reluctance to talk about it. But now, it was finally time for the truth to come out. Past and weapons. Well, I was living in the Intis Republic with my parents, but the thugs who wanted money from our small workshop decided we were not able to give them enough money per week, so they tried kidnapping all three of us. Only, my parents fought back, killing one of the thugs in the process of trying to escape, only to be killed by a girl with superpowers who suddenly appeared behind them like a ghost. Then I was put in a small cage and thrown into a carriage with others like me, and we traveled for a really long time until some believers of the Evernight goddess stopped us and killed the slavers before trying to save us. Suddenly 2 people in red robes attacked the believers of the Evernight goddess and killed everyone. Somehow I was able to escape as soon as I was freed from the cage. Being the first to be released, I had been able to successfully escape without anyone noticing and hid in the forest outside Tingen before finally sneaking in and then finding your cafe. Well, that is about it, Max said, not knowing why he was telling a large portion of the truth, but unlike the sudden urge to enter old man Yuxis' room, Max did not feel anything unnatural about his giving out a good portion of the truth without actually saying everything. This time he had actually thought about the answer some time ago and was answering according to that script, since he was not sure if old man Yuxis had some connections with the authorities or not. He should be able to find out about the carriage incident and make sense of Max's story. But making up some lies about his origin would mean that if old man Yuxis went around digging, Max needed to make a whole lot of preparations to match his fake origin story. Thus, this method was a lot more suitable, at least until he became a beander. I see. The old man ran his slightly wrinkled hands through his white hair smoothly while making sense of the whole situation. Anyways, what is your choice? He continued, passing the ball pack into Max's court, waiting for his response on his future. When Max had initially come into his cafe, he had thought he was nothing but a sad and malnutritional child, but he only later got to know that he was actually rather considerably knowledgeable in mechanics and the likes, while also having a temperament similar to adults. Overall, he did not feel like a child when one spoke to him, only looked like one, and even that was gradually being fixed with his strict diet and gradually increasing exercises the old man was making him do before getting ready in the mornings and before sleeping in the nights. Well, I would like to learn about and even become these superpowered people one day. I already know most of those who had kidnapped me are already dead, but the superpowered person who killed my parents is still alive in the Intis Republic. Once I become strong enough, I will go there and take revenge. Max said while creating a plausible revenge story to produce motive for himself to take on the risks and become a beander. Old man Yuxis only sighed hearing this. Although the course of the conversation was not what he had expected, the final result was pretty much what he had thought it would end up as after realizing that Max had seen his sword. He knew, based on Max's explanation, that he would choose this path no matter the dangers around it, if only for the sake of revenge, excluding other factors like his ambitions and other thoughts. Sighing once more, he nodded to Kai and began to explain certain things about the beander world to Max, including the fact that people with superpowers were called beanders. Of course, Max already knew this, but he kept it to himself and acted like he was learning everything for the first time. Soon came the part where old man Yuxis told Max about his options of joining an official beander organization like the Nighthawks and Red Gloves of the Evernight Goddess who mainly operate in Leon and East Balam, the mandated punishers of the Lord of Storms who mainly operate in Lowen, East Balam, Rorstad Archipelago, and the Sonia Sea, the Inquisition of the Eternal Blazing Sun operating in the Intis Republic, and West Balam, and the machinery hivemind of the god of steam and machinery who work with restrictions in Leon, and mainly in the Intis Republic. There were also other Orthodox churches, 7 in total, but only these 4 have actively operating teams in regions who have been visible to the other churches. Hearing this information, which was most definitely not common knowledge in the novel, even for the unofficial beanders in Tingen or Backland of the Leon Kingdom, where Max currently was. "Old man, are you also a beander?" Max asked with a questioning look in his crimson eyes, reflecting the silently brooding Euxis with his white hair and beard. "No, but I have worked with them for a long time. The sword you saw that must have scared you is a beander item. You cannot use it at the moment, its requirements are too strong and the side effects are even worse. Here, take this. You can use it to protect yourself in desperate situations. For now though, you need to focus on recovery until your body can work perfectly on normal food. Then I will teach you how to use the knife." Max took the 5-inch knife from the old man, pulling it out of the leather scabbard and seeing the shine resembling a newly forged metal weapon that has either never been used before or has been maintained incredibly well. And based on the rather worn condition of the scabbard, it was likely the latter. "Thanks," Max said, still observing the knife in intrigue. As a 21st century office worker, a rather manipulative scumbag, but a normal worker nonetheless, Samuel's interaction with knives was limited to those at his own home and restaurants, neither of which were actually meant for self-defense or assault, with the only damage they dealt was to fruits, vegetables and not-so-living and highly processed meats. The original Max on the other had even less experience with knives. Most of his life revolved around mechanical inventions and their usages like gears, chains, bolts, and even a bit understanding of the steam engine. Thus, Max was holding a combat knife in his hand for the first time in 2 lives. "It's heavy," Max muttered under his breath. "Of course, it is. It's made of Damascus steel, folded 50 times before being drawn out into a blade. It is at least twice as strong as normal steel," old Max Euxis said with a good amount of force behind his words, showing he was either deeply passionate about the weapons, or weapons in general, or that he did not like what Max had said. Max just silently nodded. From the bit of general knowledge Samuel had, and from what the original Max knew, he could make out that Damascus steel involved combining 2 different kinds of metals and folding them together, to thoroughly mix them while eliminating impurities and resulting in a stronger and purer metal. This process is also responsible for the wave patterns all across the blade created due to the folds. "Now go and begin your exercises," old man Euxis said in an authoritarian tone, and Max just smiled as he drew his attention away from the blade and stood up. Putting the Damascus knife away, he began with his light jog for warming up before going through the sets of exercises that reminded him of a certain hero who went bald while gaining a fiction-breaking level of power. He had decided not to leave until he could actually use the knife for protection. May 20th 1348 of the 5th epoch. Another week passed and Max was finally back to health. Although his muscles did not look much better than before, at least they were present, and his bones were no longer sticking to his skin like he was an undead. Yesterday he had gone with old man Euxis to get the groceries needed for the cafe in the morning, and today, he was to repeat the same task again without the old man to mentor him through the task. And finally, he would be able to take some time off the old man's strict schedule to explore a bit, and ask about the ingredients of his beander potion. Although he did not like how strict the old man was, he was also considerably thankful for having come across this shop while searching, since it was only due to this strict schedule that he had recovered so quickly. Furthermore, he had also learned how to actually wield his Damascus knife. Despite not being proficient at it, at the very least, he would not kill himself trying to hold it up to someone else. Ingredients and amp, new face. Leaving Café Antoine, Max adjusted the Damascus knife in the leather scabbard that was attached to a leather strap around his thin waist. He also adjusted the pouch containing a few tens of soli, tied using a thin strap of dried vine around his neck and tucked into his brown shirt that did not have buttons, and instead used thread, which was cheaper than buttons. This was his casual clothing that he wore while exercising and doing chores outside the cafe, so as to keep those white clothes in pristine condition, or at least as white and new-looking as possible. His pants were also brown but did not go all the way down to his feet, ending somewhere between his heel and knee to prevent mud from ruining them. Finally, he had a makeshift hat on that would block the sun of the late morning, which could get pretty strong despite the weather being just as cool as before. Walking through the streets of Tingen, Max felt it just as odd as the first time he walked on the streets with old man Euxis to reach Café Antoine. It felt really off walking on these very crudely built stone roads instead of the smooth asphalt he was used to. The pollution was also much worse here. Compared to the 21st century, where the pollution came in the form of microparticles and radiation that were invisible to the naked eye and only caused harm in the long run through cancer of other terminal diseases, the pollution in this steam and machinery era was much more direct, smoke and soot from chimneys of either steam boilers of firewood from houses to keep warm. There was also a lot less noise since there were no cars, no mobile phones, no buses or acroplanes. Only humans walking around while chatting physically with other humans or just contemplating their lives while moving from one place to another, with the occasional horse-drawn carriage which made some noise. The only place that was actually full of sounds and noise was also the place with the liveliest atmosphere in all of Tingen, the marketplace. Countless stall owners were waving around and encouraging passers-by to enter their stalls to purchase items, while customers who were already inside were arguing for lower prices or just inspecting the goods. Max went straight for this place as this was the same marketplace that the old man had brought him just a day ago. He followed the same route and bought all the harder to find and easily sold out ingredients for the cafe, before heading to one of the stalls to ask for something else. "Do you happen to have the eye of a blue-tailed sea bass?" Max asked the owner of the fish stall. "No lad, that stuff'll rot before we can bring it here. You ought to go to the docks, there might be someone there who has it." "Thanks, uncle," Max said while leaving the stall. Of course, he would not give up asking for this item in this marketplace, not only because he did not trust the seller he had just met, but because he would definitely not know what every other seller had and did not have. Plus, he had many more items to collect for his beander potion. Sequence 9. Beander. Potion Formula. 100 milliliters of pure water, 2 drops of 21% sulfuric acid, 1 centimeter root of the yellow birch tree, and 2 eyes of the blue-tailed sea bass. Recipe preparation method. Crush the eyes of the. He needed to collect a good amount of materials, and by asking around, he was able to find someone who was selling sulfuric acid at 50%, as well as someone selling pure distilled water, for a total of 12 soli. Unfortunately, he would need to explore the docks soon to try and find someone there who was selling the eyes of a blue-tailed sea bass and the root of the yellow birch tree. But it had already been 20 minutes since he arrived at the marketplace, and if he did not quickly purchase all the other items needed for the cafe, the old man would either get worried and search for him, or suspect something, or perhaps both. Thus, Max returned to the cafe without purchasing the ingredients for his portion, and only the stud for the cafe, and continued this pattern for a few days before finally understanding where the docks were and making his way there in the morning, before purchasing any materials. The docks were essentially a large area where the two rivers that flowed around Tingen met, resulting in a region of calm waters where boats and small ships would anchor for trading before heading downriver again and into the open ocean. Here, Max had used his first month's salary to purchase the root almost the moment he had found it, after haggling down the price to 10 soli of course. Unfortunately, he had not found the blue-tailed sea bass yet, so he quickly rushed back to the marketplace and purchased all the material for the cafe there, ignoring the sulfuric acid and water since these two were in large and constant supply. Making sure none of the dirt from the docks was on his shoes or clothes. Max returned to the cafe with confident steps, only to falter upon seeing that there was a strange man inside the cafe, despite the shop still being closed. It was supposed to open at least 20 minutes later once the old man had prepared the ingredients for the morning hoard. Immediately becoming alert, Max held his bag of ingredients in his left hand, while holding his Damascus knife in the other, hiding it behind the brown bag of ingredients from the intruder. Carefully, he opened the door and glanced at the man in front of him. He was wearing a blue formal suit with a yellow shirt inside and a dark brown tie. He was also wearing Prussian blue leather shoes and was holding a silver-tipped black walking cane. Clearly, he was someone rich, and seeing the frown on old man Yux's face while talking to the man, Max became even more on guard. Ting. Both individuals inside turned to face Max, who has just entered. Max was only now notified that the intruder was almost just as old as the old man, but he also had a scar across his nose and into his mouth, greatly disfiguring him, reminding Max of a certain good cop in a very not good city who was nearly burned alive. Of course, it was not to that extent, but close enough. Old man. Max looked at old man Euxis, before turning to look at the rich, disfigured intruder, then back at the old man, signaling something that only the two of them knew. However, the disfigured man coughed suddenly seeing this, while the old man just closed his eyes and slapped his forehead. Only then did Max realize that the intruder was holding back his laughter, his disfigured face contorting into something only a mother could love while turning a shade of red he had not even seen in tomatoes. So, he's an old friend. From work I assume. Max ignored the dying intruder who was choking on his own saliva and walked to the counter before putting the groceries there. Both Old Man Euxis and the now recovering intruder noticed the Damascus knife that Kai tried to slyly put away, hoping nobody saw it, but he didn't care too much. The intruder glanced at the old man, who just put on a whatever expression and shrugged, opening the entrance to the back of the cafe to allow Max to enter and change his clothes, preparing for the day's customers. Max entered and got to change in the back room. Faintly, he could hear the two old men talking, and slowly the conversation was getting louder and louder. Decided it was safer with him, Max took his Damascus knife with him as he left the back rooms in his work clothes, and he could finally hear the conversation going on in the still-closed cafe in Twine. Just once, Euxis. All we have to do is a normal stakeout, just like the old days. Nothing but observing and reporting from a distance. I have said this once, and I will say it 1,000,000 more times. I am retired. I will not be going back, especially not now that I have someone to care for again. His words trailed off as he noticed Max entering, all prepared for his day of work. Max decided to use his innocent appearance of a child somewhere between 10 and 15 depending on who you were asking, to talk to the intruder, who had not taken off his top hat, revealing a shiny bowling ball. He didn't even have eyebrows. Hey old baldy, are you a beander? Or do you have some beander items with you? Do you work for M19 or one of the churches? Or just for the kingdom? Oh, are you perhaps a detective working to solve a mystery? Capiefed. This time, it was the old man who was dying to hold back his laughter. Bald man and betrayal. Brat, just for you information, I am not bald. As though to prove his point, the baldy took a pence out of his breast pocket, why it was there would remain a mystery, and placed it on his head. Astoundingly, it began floating just about 3 millimeters above his head as though magic was involved. So, you are a beander, Max exclaimed as he thought the bald man had some sort of magnetism-related powers. Seeing the shock in Max's eyes, the bald man just sighed as he put the coin away to answer his other questions, giving up on fixing the misunderstanding. Of course, Max could actually see the hair on his head very clearly, and he was unfortunate enough to also face a similar fate in his previous life as Samuel over the years as his hairline receded to the point it had become a hair void rather than a line. Still, he did not like the fact that the old man had been laughing at him for absolutely no actual reason other than the look he gave the old man, and this was how he was going to take revenge. Yes, but my powers are not related to holding coin in the air, that was just my hair. Besides, I do not work for M19 nor do I work for any of the churches. You can consider me to be a freelancer of sorts, with my speciality being collecting information for the churches in M19. And your old man here used to work with me. We were partners and built our organization up from the ground. And what is the organization called? Twilight Hermit Order. Max did not show any shock at this name, despite the chaos ensuing in his mind. He was already preparing to call out to a certain entity who might be able to help him escape, but there would definitely be a cost related to using it. However, as soon as the thought crossed his mind, he put it away since he was just a normal human at the moment, and he had done nothing wrong. Other than that, he also likely only had a single chance to use that entity's help, and he was trying to save it for his ritual for Fool's End. Thankfully, seeing no reaction on Max's face, the bald man continued. Is not our name. We are called the Knowledge Magisters. Then what was with the Twilight Hermit Order? It sounds like a better name than Knowledge Magisters, Max said, propping for an explanation behind the fake name. The bald man did not respond, and instead looked over at old man Euxis, who once again just shrugged and got back to preparing the food for morning. Listen here carefully, little Max. Other than the Orthodox churches in MI9, there are also unofficial beander organization, and unlike the former, these unofficial ones are very dangerous. One of them is the Twilight Hermit Order. If you ever come into contact with people from it, it is best if you just try to escape without harming or angering them in any way. That is how dangerous they are. So, they have super strong sequence beanders. What sequence is their highest? You do not need to know this. What you do need to know is that there is a reason they are not called an Orthodox organization and have to live in the shadows of the Orthodox organizations, who can casily kill off all the members of these unorthodox organizations. Yet, there are reasons they still exist, and thus we must always be wary of them. This guy seems like a dependable person, Max thought to himself. So, bald uncle, what is your name? Cedric. Nay, just Cedric will do fine. Cool, old Cedric, what is your pathway? And what sequence are you at? Max knew it was actually against some code of beanders to ask pathways and sequences, but he was just a kid who did not know better. Using that as an excuse would allow him to gain the pathway of this old man. First of all, kid, never ever ask anyone about their pathway unless they are your friend, and in the beander circle, nobody is your friend. Anyways, I am of the Paragon pathway, more commonly known as the Savant pathway. As for the sequence, I cannot give you this information as it is very important for my survival, but I will tell you this, I cannot be considered a low sequence beander. Not anymore at least. Alright, enough chit-chat. Euxis, just think about it for a bit. There are still 2 days before the mission. You know how to contact me. Alright then, I'll be heading out. Hopefully, see you before and after the mission. With that, old Cedric put on his top hat and headed out of the still-closed Café Antoine. Max was just staring at open sign that was facing him on the class window while the closed sign face outside, with many thoughts running through his head until old Max Euxis yelled at him to get back to cleaning and preparing the tables. That night, Max heard a familiar opening of a cupboard and pulling out of planks, until the same thud he had heard before repeated itself. Slowly getting out of bed, Max opened his door as carefully as possible. Thankfully the old man likes to keep his door hinges well oiled and always functioning to perfection, much like most of his life. Through the mirror placed in the hall between their rooms, Max could see the old man standing in front of the box through the door that was kept ajar. Neither completely closing the door nor completely leaving it open was unlike the old man, showing he had something on his mind at least. And Max assumed it was most likely the mission that old Cedric was talking about. Old man Euxis was just staring at the box, not opening it nor putting it away. Max had never seen him being this indecisive but decided to wait and see. After a good 10 minutes, the old man just sighed and opened the box. But he did not pull out the black sword with human-like veins on it, and instead pulled out a normal dagger, slashing his palm and dropping a good amount of blood into a cup near him. After a while, he closed his eyes and began muttering something which Max could not clearly hear. However, he could make out the last few words being something like, belonging to Cedric Tegan, or, belonging to Cedric Negan. Well, the latter made more sense considering he was trying to hide his last name when giving Mac his name. But then that raised more questions. How was he related to Duke Negan, if he even was related? After all, he looked old enough to be Duke Negan's father, but from what Max could remember, that man had long since died. Is he an illegitimate older brother to the Duke? Or more interestingly, is he Duke Negan's father who just faked his death? Perhaps that is where he got his scar from. But then again, being of the Savant pathway would likely remove the latter since I am pretty sure Duke Negan was of the. Just to see our pathway in a pretty high sequence at that only now did Max notice a green tentacle appear out of the blue and poke into the cup with the old man's blood. After a few seconds, it retracted from the cup, not a single drop of blood on its slimy body. Before facing the old man, Max held back the urge to charge in and cut the tentacle in half using his knife, somewhat because he trusted that the old man knew what he was doing when summoning this creature, and half because he knew that physical attacks have little effect on spiritual beings. The old man took out a letter he had prepared and gave it to the tentacle, who just grabbed it and pulled back into the nothingness it had come from. The old man sighed as he put the dagger back where it belonged in the box, and Max noticed that the old man's hand was no longer bleeding, and was also showing signs of recovering rapidly. So, he was a beander. But lied to me. Upon this realization, Max sighed as he felt something being broken within him. He closed his door silently and went to sleep. He no longer felt like asking the old man about the spirit that he had summoned, or the ritual he had used. He just felt like going to sleep for now. Nightmare and letter. Opening his eyes, Max found himself weightless. Looking around, it felt like his eyes were closed, yet looking into the distance, he could make out faint spots of light like fireflies in the night sky. It took him a moment to put 2 and 2 together and realize he was in space. *T, I'm in the cosmos. Max also noticed how the back of his hands and legs were bright red, as though in a club under a red light or. Turning around, Max saw a blob of flowing blood rippling all over a giant circle, and as soon as he saw it, he felt as though it saw him too. Countless murmuring flooded into his mind like an unstoppable torrent of chaos, allurement, and strangely the moon itself. It also felt a little evil as though he was looking at an abyss, but restrained not just in power level, but also as though the abyss had been chained up. Mother goddess of depravity, well, what is left of her? Max thought as he recalled how she had apparently lost her moon and mother pathways on Earth, and was also now cating up the moon or something. Anyways, this was an outer god, an ex-pillar who lost about half her powers. Max was not exactly sure, but he was sure that he should not be meeting this being while he is not even a beander. More importantly, the ravings he had just heard that had already settled into his mind should not have been transferred so easily. No, being a normal human, they should have either caused him to die from his organs being blended into mush and leaking out all his holes, being turned into some corrupted form of a mythical creature related to the mother goddess of depravity, or just exploded into chunks of flesh. But nothing like that happened. Instead, he got a lot of information from her, a lot of which he already knew, but some of it was actually useful information. Furthermore, he could also feel some amount of curiosity, interest, and strange enough hope as well within the information that had been transferred to him. Nodding slightly at the red mass of the moon, Max tried to speak but found that there was no air in his lungs to speak. All of a sudden he began conscious of the fact that he had not been breathing since he was in space, and began to panic as he tried to forcefully take breaths, until he suddenly opened his eyes. He was back in his bedroom, the gas light was turned on and the old man's worried face appeared in front of him. Ax, Ma, Max, are you alright? Can you hear me? What is wrong? Old man, what happened? Why do you look so worried? You suddenly began yelling for help, and I came in, then you opened your eyes and were no longer yelling for help, but you had also stopped breathing. It seemed as though you were talking with someone, but there was no one in the room. Then you nodded and then came back. Now, can you explain to me what happened? What did you encounter? What is your name, and where did you live before you came here? Holy shish balls, it was not a dream of me imagining making friends with outer gods, since my pathway would lead me to becoming one of them as well. It actually happened, and the information, that ritual, it's all still there. No, wait, first I need to explain something to the old man. Calm down, old man, I am still me. I was kidnapped, then sold, then the slavers who were transporting me were killed by Evernight believers, who were then killed by red-robed individuals who were beyonders. In this process I escaped and came across you, who took me in. SCE, it is still me. Old Max Euxis loosened his grip around Max's shoulders, allowing him struggle free and sit up on his bed, realizing that he was covered from head to toe in sweat, leaving not just his clothes wet but also the bed and blanket. As for what I encountered, it was just a bad dream I had after seeing that tentacle you summoned out of thin air. Max said, discreetly putting the blame on the old man to heed his nod as more questions. And this seemed to work as the old man sighed and slowly stood up, realizing he had forgotten to close his door when performing the summoning ritual. Alright, let me get some water, he said as he stood up and straightened his clothes and hair before heading out of Max's room. Max felt a bit of sadness at seeing the worried expression on the old man, but the feeling was not as strong as before, and he was glad. At some point in time, not too long away from now, he was bound to leave the old man, and having any form of remaining connection to him would put him in grave danger as he advanced the sequences and made enemies of powerful beyonders. Even worse, he might even make some beander friends, who would be even more dangerous to the old man. After settling down the old man and both of them going back to sleep in their respective rooms, Max woke up the next day to return to his routine of exercising, practicing how to wield the knife as well as how to maintain it, before running off for Grocerix and investigating the location of the final missing item of his Bender Sequence 9 potion, the blue-tailed sea bass's eyes. Unfortunately, even after around 5 days, he does not find it. May 26, 1348 of the 5th epoch. However, on this particular night, Max finds something amiss in the old man's room, who had just left to go to the bathroom. Over the past few days, he seemed to have aged a whole lot, with more wrinkles on his face and his eyes looking as though they were terrified yet held onto a single strand of hope. Max had chalked it up to the bald Cedric Negan, who had said the mission was 3 days ago and had not returned as of now. The old man had just gone to the bathroom, and Max noticed a green tentacle briefly appearing. Seeing no one around, it pulled out a yellow envelope and placed it on the table before vanishing like it was never there in the first place. Max slowly got out of bed and headed to the envelope, hoping it was news that the bald Cedric was alive and safe, so the old man could return to being normal and move on in life. It seemed that his attachment to the old man, despite being with him only for just short of a month, was still enough for him to worry about the old man, even after the feeling of betrayal he had felt as the old man lying to him about being a beander. Opening the envelope with his knife, careful not to tear anything, Max began reading. By now, He was considerably fluent in Leon, which was rather spectacular for a normal person, and Max was happy with it. After all, he was not a freak of nature like Klein who could learn multiple languages in a matter of weeks. My dearest Euxis, the one so close to my heart and soul. I do not swing that way though. If you are receiving this letter, it means that I am either dead, trapped indefinitely, trapped temporarily, or captured by someone or something. I cannot write any details as to what happened, but I set my messenger up with multiple safeties in case of anything, one of them being to deliver this letter to you if I was ever to meet you before going missing. Cedric and blocking. My dearest Euxis, the one so close to my heart and soul. I do not swing that way though. If you are receiving this letter, it means that I am either dead, trapped indefinitely, trapped temporarily, or captured by someone or something. I cannot write any details as to what happened, but I set my messenger up with multiple safeties in case of anything, one of them being to deliver this letter to you if I was ever to meet you before going missing. If you are the reason for me going missing, I swear I will haunt your wrinkly *s till the end of time. I repeat, I still do not swing that way. Anyways, please offer a few drops of blood to my messenger every 2 days, else it will be forced to contact others. Since I last met you, my letter to them will contain your name in them, and they will come to you for answers one way or another. If you want to live peacefully, since some of these people are not my friends, keep my messenger well fed so that my contract with it does not expire and I can use it to either send messages for rescue, escape, or just normally use it once I escape. However, if you receive another letter from my messenger within 1 week, I request you to pack up your things and leave as soon as the letter arrives. Do not read the letter until you have left Tingen. Preferably go somewhere with a large population so it is harder to single you out and live your retired life there. Backland might be a good idea, and please, for the love of all that is sacred, and the horrors of all that is not sacred, do not go to find me or in search of me. I knew what I had signed up for, and was willing to take the risks. I will not bring you or yours in harm's way, ever again. What are you reading in my room? A shadow suddenly covered the light from the gas lamp, and Max turned around trying to hide the letter, knowing it was stupid and that the old man already knew there was something. Nothing. Give it to me, Max. Here. Hesitating for a moment, Max sighed and finally handed the opened letter to the old man, knowing nothing good could come from this. Still, he could not just not give it to him, since he already knew that the old man was a beander, or at least had some characteristics of one. Plus, despite his old age, Max knew the old man would not only be able to kill him very easily, but given a proper sword, he should also be able to easily handle a recently advanced Sequence 9 beander if they did not use guns. This was just an estimation of the old man's power, but Max was pretty sure it was likely and even possible. After all, most of the Sequence 9, and in fact most low sequence beanders are not much different than humans, with just some extraordinary tricks up their sleeves. It is only at the mid-sequences that we see powers that utterly defy logic and affect the world around people directly instead of having to rely on tricks. Old man Euxis read through the paper and as he went lower, his hand began to tremble slightly. Max noticed his eyes were slowly turning red and he could see, under his neatly combed beard, his teeth were clenched. However, after finished the letter, he just took a deep breath and threw it into the fireplace in the living room that was slowly turning into charcoal. Then he turned back to Max and said softly, "Max, I know you might be worried, but fret not. Cedric will be fine. Cedric will be back, I am sure." The latter half of the old man's words were spoken rather softly, as though a butterfly were trying to speaking using nothing but its wings. Max noticed this, but there was nothing much he could do. However, he soon realized something as a thought struck him. If old man Euxis was to go in search of Cedric, I would also end up following behind the old man, or at best, hold back until I was strong enough to take revenge. It all depended on the extent to which his emotions controlled his actions. Sighing at this, Max came up with a plan and quickly recalled all his worst memories, no matter how much discomfort he felt, and looked up at the old man with tears in his eyes. "Old man, why you won't leave me behind because of this, right? I don't have anyone other than you left. Where will I go?" Almost immediately, the train of thought that old man Euxis was thinking was broken as he recovered himself and looked over at Max, whose considerably grown face overlapped with a newborn child's, and behind him, he saw her. The love of his life, and the one who chose her own death over giving away details on Euxis. The one who he had promised to be with till death, and death had indeed taken her away. But he knew, he would never be able to love another like he had loved her. In fact, he had even thought about joining her and his son in the kingdom of Evernight. But Cedric had convinced him to live on, saying it was what she would have wanted, somehow bringing him to Tingen to settle down in a cafe. Suddenly, he looked to the side and saw him. Cedric, his best mate from the day they met at the Alias Orphans, and battle brother, standing right beside him, patting him on the shoulder with a reassuring smile. Immediately, any calm he had vanished as he swung his left palm to disperse the image of Cedric he had built in his mind. No, you are not dead, just you wait, I will find you. Max too noticed this burning passion that had replaced the despair, and he could only shake his head internally. His actions had not only failed to stop the old man, but also backfired and had caused the old man to be even more driven. Old man Euxis stood up immediately and left the room, heading to the common bathroom in the corridor before the living room, ignoring Max almost completely and before returning in new clothes. Max noticed he was wearing a black windbreaker similar to those that have been described in the novel as the ones worn by Nighthawks. He was also wearing a black buttoned shirt inside and black pants, as well as a black hat, not for fashion but to his most of his face from others. The old man went ahead to his cupboard and opened it, still ignoring Max, before moving aside all his clothes until the back wall was visible. Using his bare hands, he pushed one of the planks, causing it to pop out on the other side, and he pulled hard on it until it came out completely, repeating this 3 more times until a brown wooden box was visible on the inside. After pulling it out and throwing it onto the ground since it was too heavy to lift normally for too long, the old man opened it using a key he had with him, and pulled out many knives and daggers, as well as a gun. The old man indeed had a revolver with him as well as a good number of bullets. He carefully loaded the gun and made sure the parts of the gun were working before putting it away on his body under his windbreaker, and finally looking at the sword. However, after a moment of staring at it, old Max Euxis just closed the box and put it into his cupboard without locking anything. Old man Euxis turned around and began walking to the door, and finally, Max decided to ask him. Originally, he was just going to remain silent and allow the old man to leave, preventing him from ever falling into this mess by not knowing exactly who the old man was going to fight or where he was going. Unfortunately, he knew he could not allow the old man to leave without giving him some clue to follow behind him in case he did not make it back, and considering the old man did not take his beander sword, it was likely going to result in his eventual death. Old man, Max shouted as he rushed in front of the old man, blocking his path as thunder echoed behind him and a storm began to brew in the night sky of Tingen, all of a sudden, a rather foreboding sign. Beander and departure. You won't be taking your beander sword? Max asked, already knowing the answer. No, old man Euxis finally took notice of Max, as a hint of hesitation flashed in his mind, before being immediately snuffed out by even more determination. Then tell me how to use it. You know I will come after you, and if you don't tell me how to use it, I will use it anyways, and it will most likely kill me before I can even get to you. Hesitation could finally be clearly seen on the old man's face as he thought about the possibility of Max following behind him, launching himself into death's door in search of him, who had also likely already done the same in search of Cedric. Did he have to die? Did he want to sacrifice Max? All for what? The chance that Cedric was alive. But then, that very thought repeated in his mind again, and his resolve was reinforced. Yes, it was worth it. Cedric would have done the same for him as well. The sword is not called a beander item, it is called a sealed artifact 101 of our knowledge magisters, belonging to the Hanged Man pathway at sequence 4, Black Knight. It is essentially a spiritual, immortal poison on a sword, corrupting the flesh, blood and spirit of the target that is slashed by the item. However, every time you use the sword, you will have to supply it with blood within 10 minutes or it will consume yours until it is satisfied. And more importantly, you will have to undergo what can only be described as mental torture, as it will bring out your worst memories and replay them every night for 3 nights after each use. Thus, I suggest you do not use it unless you become a beander of at least the 5th sequence. Alright, now, tell me where exactly you are heading. Otherwise, I will end up asking every beander or beander-related organization about your whereabouts until I find them. I will likely run into enemies more often than friends based on the conversation between you and old Baldy, who is now missing. Old man Euxis heard the clear rationalization of the entire situation from Max, but he would not be willing to give such information to a child who had just recovered from having his parents murdered in front of his eyes, being sold as a slave, being rescued only for the rescuers to be murdered as well and somehow escaping. Suddenly, Old Man Euxis pointed a finger at Max and whispered softly, but Max heard it. Imprison. Instantly, Max felt as though he was encased in a jar of incredibly thick concrete, despite there not actually being anything around him. He then faintly heard Old Man Euxis say something much louder. Release is prohibited here until dawn, he said while staring at nothing in particular. Release, he said as he pointed his index finger at Max once more, but nothing happened. Old Man bent down to Max and said a few words before putting back his hat and leaving the house, trapping Max until dusk, unable to move, talk, eat or sleep, just trapped. Sorry, and the passcode is 5425. Max's eyes grew red as despite not wanting to, he knew this body of his was too attached to the old man for him to ignore this incident and just move on with his own merry life. He knew that he would ultimately have to follow behind the old man and either save him or take revenge. But for now, he was stuck, imprisoned by a Sequence 6 judge of the Justiciar pathway who had used verdict on him. All he could do was think about his future actions, unable to move or do anything about it. Max began to contemplate many things as the slightly muffled sound of thunder echoed in his cars. The very first thing he would have to do was to become a beander, and for that, he would need money. With enough money, he could hire someone to search for and get him the last ingredient for his potion. Thankfully, nobody knew about such a potion, and none of its ingredients matched with any other potion formula, so nobody would be keeping an eye on them or tracking them, almost completely eliminating the possibility of him being found out before he reached Sequence O at the very least. Plus, he also had to move out at least sometime before Klein reincarnated into this forsaken world, since if he recalled correctly, the Evernight goddess would be paying close attention to the entirety of Tingen. Compared to a king of angels like Adam, a true god was much more dangerous and powerful. She would likely find out about Max before he could do anything, and likely eliminate a variable like him almost immediately, ignoring the restrictions the gods had placed on themselves about not descending with their true bodies. In fact, she might not even have to descend, just any random Sequence 9 would be enough to finish Max off as he was now. Thus, after becoming a beander, and gaining information on where the old man had gone, Max would leave Tingen immediately. With his plan set in motion, Max realized that his tears were not falling to the ground, just slowly floating in front of him, pooling up as neither they nor Max were able to move. This was Max's truly first experience with beander powers, and it was exactly as horrible as Klein must have felt upon realizing his entire life had been manipulated until his death. Planned out by one Ince Zangwil and his insane feather pen, one king of angels and reincarnation of the ancient sun god, Adam, one true goddess, Evernight, one will of the original owner of the Saphira Castle, Lord of Mysteries, and one will of the original creator of Earth and one will of the original creator of the universe. Well, maybe the comparison is a bit skewed, but it still feels terrible not being able to do anything. Max tried to lighten his mood with a poor attempt at a joke, but it did not seem to work and he descended back into his rapidly spiraling thoughts. Does the old man even care about me? I mean, he just left me here and expects the trauma of such a situation to not affect a child, and furthermore, he expects me to survive on my own. No. Positive thoughts, Max, stay positive. He left me behind and restricted me so I would not catch up to him and find him. Should I just leave him? As soon as the thought crossed his mind, the rational aspect of Max's mind, where most of Samuel's memories had settled down, desperately tried to grab onto it, since he knew his best option now was to just immediately loot everything he could from this house, and leave Tingen as a whole, and go to another city. But the more emotional aspect where most of Max's own memories were present immediately pushed away the thought. Only now did Max realize that despite having died, and having the much older Samuel's memories still present within his mind, it was truly Max who was still in control. And somehow still alive. Cursing at his own stupidity, Max began to plan out his actions, and most of it started with retrieving the sword, before killing someone or stealing money from someone, enough to ask for the blue-tailed sea bass's eye. Once he finally became a beander, he would immediately use the ritual he had gained from the mother goddess of depravity, and then search for information about the old man, and see if he could rescue him. If it was not possible, he would leave Tingen and head to Backland to start anew as a beander, and if he could rescue him then he would, before forcing the old man to go with him to Backland. Why Backland? Because that was the only place he knew rather well from the novel other than Tingen. A large portion of the novel happened in these two places, while the rest of the places had a more fast-paced plot, with considerably less memorable places in each of these locations. Nodding to himself about his plan, Max had already recovered from his stupor and noticed that Dam was finally approaching, and as soon as the first rays of sunlight hit him, a crisp cracking sound echoed in the empty hall and living room before Max finally recovered his ability to move. We have somehow made it to 56th place in fanfic rankings of Weekly Mail All, not only contracted power rankings. I would like to thank everyone for their support for this novel. Leaving home, that goddamned old MAAAAANNNNNN. Max yelled out as soon as he recovered his movement, only later realizing that he had yelled loud enough to wake up the neighbors in the houses surrounding the old man's own house. Max did not hesitate and moved quickly. He first went to the old man's room and opened the cupboard, pulling out all the clothes and throwing them on the floor, before grabbing the box and placing it on the floor, before scanning the cupboard and finding what he was looking for. It was a black metal safe with a rather sturdy frame. Max mused that most Sequence 8 Beyonders would not be able to even scratch this safe. However, Max did not have to worry about that as he twisted the dial to 4 numbers with almost practiced case until he finally heard click and pull on the dial, causing the door to open, revealing what Max could only assume to be money enough to run a city like Tingen for at least a few weeks. They were Leon pound notes, all in 10-pound notes. Based on an estimate with each bundle containing around 110-pound notes, the total should be around 18k pounds. Old man was secretly a super rich guy, Max thought to himself. At first, he was going to take all the money and use it to quickly buy up all his items, but having such a large sum on a child who still looked around the age of 12 was not very safe, especially in this world. Sighing at having lost the opportunity, Max reached in and took a few bundles of money, but left the rest inside, in case he ever needed to return for more money or in case old man did return. Thus, he also wrote down a letter using ink and a yellow parchment, addressing the old man and putting it into the safe before closing it and putting all the clothes back in place. I'll find you, old man. No matter where you are. I will find you and I will save you. Perhaps not now, but once I either get powerful enough, or physically strong enough, I will. You better stay alive till then. I have left around 13k of the original amount in this safe for when you need it, and hopefully, you will, so you can read this note. Also, if someone other than the old man who owns this house is reading this note, I suggest you close the safe, back out of the house and never come back. If I find even a single pound missing, I will hunt you down to the ends of the earth and beyond. If you die, I will hunt down your descendants and parents, your entire family until nothing is left of you, and nobody to remember you by. This is not a threat, but a promise. Signed, me. Max then turned his attention to the box of weapons that were too heavy for him to carry around. He opened it, took a smaller knife than his current Damascus and slipped it into his sock. He also took a few other items like tweezers, some leather gloves with black painted metal knuckles, and a backpack with clothes and his money. Of course, he put only 2k money in there in case it gets stolen, before putting the rest of the money in random places all over his body, such that not a lot was in a single place. Furthermore, he also took his pouch that had his solely and pence and put it around his neck. Currently, Max was wearing the good clothes that he often wore for work. It was a white buttoned shirt with white pants and black shoes. This time, however, he also put on his black coat for the cool weather outside, as well as a black top hat. Under his coat were a few weapons and the bag containing his extra pair of clothes and some pounds. With his full get-up secured and ready, Max left the house. However, he did not immediately start searching for the old man. First, he needed a place to stay, as well as a place to hire someone to search for his blue-tailed sea bass eye. Suddenly, a thought struck Max as he turned where he was going, heading off towards the not-so-well-off section of Tingen. Walking, Max realized that society was truly not so different compared to back on the original Earth. Humans were living their lives, while ignoring the lives of other humans whose lives could even be considered to be living, just surviving might be more apt. Humans naturally were two-faced. One face was for those close to them, while the other was for everyone else. Some tended to lean more towards one or the other side, including more people on one of the sides, while others tended to do the opposite. Samuel was someone who did not have anyone close to him. Perhaps, he was one of the few people in society who only had a single face, and it was cruel and manipulative, lying, cheating, and an overall piece of sh*t, but still, he was not hypocritical. He knew what he was and at the very least did not lie to himself or those close to him about his character. Well, he did not have anyone to fill the latter spot. But humans in some places were living lavish lives while exploiting others who were living their lives like insects, using that same money to make more money, throwing away a minute portion of it in philanthropy and acting like it made up for everything they had done. Soon, Max reached his location. It was the address the bald old man had given before heading out the first time they had met. Max was hoping it was either the headquarters or a branch of the organization called Knowledge Magisters that he had never heard about from the book. Hopefully, they were not controlled by any god or angel, but based on Bald Cedric's reaction to the beander organizations and churches, it was likely not and was just an organization of normal people and some beyonders mixed in who did scouting operations for the official organizations of Leon, which was why they were allowed to exist in the first place. Knocking on the door thrice, Max took a step back in case the door opened outward, and then waited. However, after no response, he reached out to knock again, only for the door to suddenly open and a tall woman wearing a thick leather jacket appeared behind it, a scowl plastered on her face. She had red hair and green eyes, and her face was incredibly beautiful. Samuel would have almost immediately been smitten by her, but Max was not. Most probably because he was still young and the kind of woman that would attract his notice would likely either end up with Samuel being thrown in prison or just deeply looked down on as a predator. Their tastes in women were very different not only due to the environment they grew up in but also their biological age. "Who are you? What do you want?" "Knowledge Magisters and escape." "Excuse me miss, but do you perhaps know someone whose name started with A, C, and ends with A, C, his last name starting with an N, and has A, G, in there somewhere?" Max asked, and got his expected reaction. The woman in front of him almost immediately went on guard, her eyes widening slightly as he looked around, then closed her eyes for a moment before grabbing Max by his collar and dragging him inside. Max himself did not resist not only due to the physical difference between them, but also because of the fact that most people who knew Cedric, especially if they were part of the Knowledge Magisters, would likely also be beyonders. Once inside, however, Max was dragged through a corridor, his feet not even having the time to touch the ground until he was placed no so gently onto a rough yellow couch. In front of him was the same lady who had dragged him inside, as well as a middle-aged stout man and a much older slender man. "Who are you? Answer me or your life will be forfeit." "Well, I am here to give a mission to you guys, if this is the correct address." The stout man just ignored Max and continued to eat his chicken leg in an almost cartoonish manner, while the slender man just calmly observed. Only the woman with red hair spoke, her tone becoming more and more forceful. "How do you know Cedric? He came over to my home some time ago, then went missing, sent a letter to my old man, who went in search of Cedric, and now is also likely missing." Max just spilt the beans upon realizing that the people here were at least somewhat trustworthy considering their reaction to Max knowing Cedric's name, and their worry that although not easily visible on the two men, was still there since they had not ICFT the room. The fat man, although cating voraciously, was also still keeping an eye on Max. Max's words descended the room into an uninterrupted silence for a good 2 minutes as all three members of the Knowledge Magisters digested the information Max had just told them before a barrage of questions hit him, unexpected from the skinny old man. "When was this? What did he say? Do you know where he went? Any updates on his location? Who was your old man? How did he know Cedric?" The old man with a long white beard had already appeared very close to Max, his skinny fingers pressed against Max's face before he even knew it. As the old man spoke, Max felt as though he was strangely close to the old man. He felt as though he could trust the old man fully, and so he began speaking in a slightly methodical voice. "Cedric Negan had come to our cafe in Twine a few days ago, trying to get my old man, Euxis, to join him on a mission. Just like the old days he said. But old man Euxis rejected it because he could not anymore. Not now that I have someone to take care of, he said. Then Baldy Cedric left the cafe and never returned. Last night, his tentacle messenger brought a letter saying old man would need to give blood to the messenger every 3 days to maintain the contract with Cedric, who had likely gone missing or died. However, if he was just trapped, maintaining the contract was of utmost importance since it could allow him to escape. But old man Euxis just backed up his stuff, took his weapons and then left, trapping me in place using his beander powers until dawn." Hearing these words, the old man stepped back for a bit, his eyes widening in shock, the same as the other two people in the room. Only now did Max's eyes return to normal as he suddenly took in deep breaths, glaring at the old man, but he refrained from saying anything. However, the old man glanced at him again, and asked, causing Max's thought process to be skewed in his favor once again, and he began speaking once again. I came here to ask for your services in obtaining a blue-tailed sea bass eye. It is important for me to be able to rescue old man Euxis from wherever it is he went. Max did not elaborate further, as his face was slowly changing to someone who was constipated. The old man noticed this and focused his attention on Max and asked again. Why do you need this item? Max's face contorted even more, his eyes slowly turning red, not from emotion but from stress. His veins bulged as his fists tightened, his eyes began to rapidly change direction and blood began to come out of his nose, much to the shock of all those present. Suddenly, Max took in a deep breath and regained his senses, causing the old man to wince at the backlash of a failed brainwash. He did not waste a second as he pulled out the bloody sword from its sheath he had used to hide it, brandishing it and speaking. I know what this is and I will not hesitate to use it. Even if you are a beander, you will die. If you want to kill me, I will damn well be sure to take down one of you with me. Max said with finality in his voice, his eyes still red, even some spots of red where his blood vessels had burst, releasing blood into his eye. This was not something that would have normally happened, but who he had just faced was likely not a high-sequence beander. Perhaps just at sequence 9 or 8. Based on the attempted brainwashing he had performed, likely a lawyer from the Black Emperor pathway. But Max could not and would not reveal that he knew this information, acting like a child who had just lost his only father figure and was now out to bring him back to safety was his best disguise, since it was not a disguise at all. The three present immediately retreated at the sight of the item for two reasons. One was that all of them clearly felt the powerful spirituality of a high-sequence beander characteristic, at least above sequence 5. Plus, they also almost immediately recognized this weapon. It was the weapons of the original vice master of the knowledge magisters, Ural Vase. And most importantly, it would mean almost certain death for anyone below sequence 7, and even for the mid-sequence beanders. If they were hit by the blade, they would also likely face a perilous situation even if a normal human were to wield it like Max. Immediately, the tension in the room was palpable, until the fat man spoke up. All right, kid, settle down now, we don't want to harm you. Max had also recovered from his anger for a bit as he regained his calm and immediately began to think of methods to make the most out of the current situation. After this, he would clearly not trust these people like before again. In fact, he would not trust anyone again. Unknowingly, the memories of Samuel had rapidly corrupted the innocence of Max, or what was left of it. The only trust Max had now was towards old man Euxis, and nobody else. You three already know everything. As payment for the old B** starred trying to mind control me, one expect you to find me the eyes of the blue-tailed sea bass within a week. I will return here for the item in 1 week's time. I expect someone to be present here with my item. It is not an expensive item, it's just that it is not easily found in Tingen, thus I am giving you this time. I can understand you want to search for Cedric, but I couldn't care less about him, and please don't drag me, a normal human, into your beander mess. I will be searching for my old man on my own, and I do not want your interference in this matter. Now move and let me leave, Max said, pointing the sword at the lady who had dragged him into this mess in the first place. A few seconds of silence later, the lady moved to the side, allowing Max to leave, who slowly walked, making sure to keep the sword pointed at the trio. On the way, he picked up his bag which had his clothes and extra cash and put it on his free shoulder, leaving the one that was holding the beander's sword free. Extending his left hand behind him, Max reached out for the doorknob. After a bit of searching around without looking, Max located the metal doorknob and twisted it, closing the door behind him. He did not immediately put away the sword, but since it was already daytime, Max held it in his right hand, which he had in his jacket, before quickly making an escape. He chose to go through countless neighborhoods, walking briskly enough to move quickly, but not enough to stand out. After a few streets, and making sure nobody was following him, Max put away his beander sword. He still had to give a better name than Sealed Artifact 101 or just beander sword, and continued his winding journey across almost all of Tingen, stopping here and there to grab a bite of food at cafes and the likes, before finally letting into a normal-looking hotel. Paying a 10 solely for staying over for an entire week in advance at a moderately middle-class hotel. Naturally, now that he had money, he would not be living in the East Borough like little Mr. Fool had done for almost a year. Plus, since he was only staying here for a week, there was no point in being too stingy and living in a neighborhood with an incredibly high crime rate, especially as a normal human and not a beander yet. Sighing as he put away his bag and weapons excluding his beander sword, Max leapt onto the bed. Unfortunately, the soft cushions he had been used to as Samuel were no longer present, though it was still soft enough to prevent injuries to Max from the leap. It's been quite an eventful day, Max thought to himself as he closed his eyes and fell into the deep slumber under the crimson moon. Nightmare and artifact. Opening his eyes, Max felt as though his current location was somewhat familiar. Everything around him looked a little blurry, but after a few seconds, he could still make out where he was. It was his home, back in Intis. In front of him were the dying bodies of his parents, however, they were not trying to help him escape like in the past. No, instead, they were slowly crawling toward him with only their hands, their legs having already been cleaved off rather crudely. A trail of blood and organs was left behind with each pull. Clearly, their stomachs had also been cut or worse, completely opened up to allow the organs to flow out. Frozen by the horrifying sight, Max could not move an inch or say anything, just watching the scene with a slight tremor in his CYCS. His mother soon reached him and placed a sword in his right hand before falling to the ground, dead. His father then grabbed the hand with the sword, and pointed it at Max's throat, only to slice off his own neck at the back of the double-edged blade, which did not move despite the decapitation. Max found the blade to be rather familiar, and as soon as he focused his attention from his dead parent towards the sword, it moved swiftly towards his own throat. BWA. Max opened his eyes with a start from the nightmare, only to see the same sword from his dream rushing towards his neck, trying to kill him. Using his left hand, Max pushed the tip of the blade to the side, not wasting energy or time to try and block the blow. The sword hit the bed next to his neck, missing him completely. Only now did Max realize that his own hand was actually holding the sword, as though it was being controlled by the sword. Focusing completely on his right hand, Max failed to get it to let go of the sword, which he was already trying to pull out of the bed. Immediately noticing the danger, Max used his left hand to pry open the fingers of his right hand, and move it away from the sword, which fell off the bed and onto the wooden ground lifelessly. Holy **T. Not only does it show you nightmares, but also tries to kill you. Old man did not say anything about this. Also, I did not even use the sword, only held it and scared away some beanders with it. I did not actually cut anything or anyone. Does that mean that the very act of holding it signifies that I used it? Or is it that holding it at night, even if I don't use it, would mean it tries to kill the wielder? Also, what would happen if I use it, but do not hold it while sleeping? Wait a minute, I was not holding it while sleeping. It was next to my bed, in its makeshift sheath made from cloth. As Max came to this realization, he bent over and saw that his cloth sheath was in tatters, clearly torn open from the inside. That meant that the sword escaped the sheath, attached itself to Max's hand while he was sleeping, and then showed him the nightmare while trying to kill him. Sealed artifacts possess living traits. Max only now recalled this statement from the original novel of Lord of Mysteries and sighed at his own stupidity. Should he had just gone to a normal group of individuals to search for his item? Would that have changed the situation? Was he holding the sword while traveling to the knowledge magisters also considered wielding the item? Max would need to thoroughly investigate this before making use of the item again. Maybe I should purchase a box and keep the sword in there, maybe something like a briefcase or instrument case, that I can bring around without standing out too much, but also big enough to store the sword. Thinking until here, Max looked over at the window and noticed that the crimson moon had almost set, and the sun would soon rise, a new day would begin, and Max could not allow his nightmare and death-defying experience to determine his way forward. In this crazy world, where life and death were only a single step away from each other, knowledge was both a power and a curse. Max would have to confidentially keep moving forward to stay alive. Max shook the thought of his dead parents from his mind. The memories of Samuel helped a lot for this, as he had also lost his parents at an early age compared to most, and had already gone through everything before finally coming to a conclusion that helped him put their memories to rest. Well, once I become a beander, there will be no going back. Right now, if I dispose of the sword and invest my money somewhere which would bring me a decent profit, I could just live my life normally, and pass away due to old age or something after a few decades. Max mused to himself as he thought about his reasons for becoming a beander. Hey, who am I kidding? Even if old man Euxis was not missing while searching for his old friend who is also missing, I would have still chosen to become a beander. Samuel has already lived a considerably decent life back on the original Earth, or was it the past Earth? If it was the past Earth, then that would mean that the author of Lord of Mysteries was either a time traveler or an astrologist, neither of which Max favored, so he just assumed he had been thrown into a fictional world. Plus, I also feel like killing the B*TCH who killed my parents. Well, my revenge arc has already been set in stone. Now all that is remaining is to become a beander. Though I will have to apologize to all living beings on the earth, since I will end up being an outer god and not a great old one, I will likely end up on the other side of the war, Max thought to himself before resolving himself once more and getting out of bed. Over the next week, Max spent some time experimenting with the sword and realized that locking it in a box or cupboard which did not have any access to the sky would prevent it from gaining sentience and trying to kill him at night. He also figured out that using it did indeed involve actually cutting something or using one of its powers in another way, in which case he would have to give it blood. And if the creature you cut did not have enough blood and spirituality, it would suck it up from the owner of the sword. How did he get to know this? Simple, he went ahead and cut a squirrel he had found with the blade, and it sucked up basically the entire blood from the creature, before driving a needle into Max's palm and pulling his own blood. He was able to pull the sword out of his hand, even using his left hand, until it had enough blood. As it turned out, however, the nightmares would only appear if he was holding the sword while sleeping or had used the sword. If he was holding it while sleeping, it would also try to kill him at night like he had experienced, while if it was locked away, he would only experience the nightmare once a night. And if he did not use it for the previous 3 days, and also ensured it did not get access to the night sky, he would be able to sleep properly. This was done by not using it, and only holding onto it from the 2nd day of the week onwards. For a Sequence 4 first-grade artifact, these downsides were considerably weak compared to things that would forever try to put you in its control or things that would constantly change fate to your favor, but also try to constantly kill you like the crazy quill. Experimenting and train. Other than experimenting with his beander blade, Max also continued to perform the exercises that old man Euxis had taught him, to try and rebuild his body. In this world, even the slightest advantage he would have over his enemy would mean the difference between life and death. Thus, having a fit body would allow him to, if not anything else, then try and use close combat in places where beander powers were restricted. As for now, having a fit body would actually give him power that he could use for self-defense. Other than that, Max also paid some interest to the newspaper he had been receiving as a perk of being a guest at this hotel. It had indeed become one of the highlights of Max's daily life of being a shut-in to protect himself and prevent unforeseen contact with individuals and creatures he did not want to come into contact with just yet. Max also went through each and every 10-pound note he had with him, making sure to use various means to make it seem older than it actually is. The reason? Well, not so well-off individuals should not have brand new 10-pound notes just lying around to be used as though they had gone and robbed a bank. In this process, Max realized that he had finally counted his total wealth at the moment, and it amounted to 4,000 pounds, 5 solely, 14 penny. This was a considerable sum, and Max had already thought of many things he could do with it. In the future, when he is trying to advance to higher sequences, he will definitely need his own beander organization to handle things for him, while also needing his own financial empire to support the former and himself. In fact, the latter was more important to set up quickly and stabilize himself by the time the plot actually began. Perhaps, his very existence had already changed the plot in ways he could not predict, and perhaps he was already the center of attention for countless beings. But if there were things outside his power, he could deal with them once he had enough power to deal with them, or a way to deal with them without being powerful enough. Either way, such matters were not important at the moment. For today, Max was going to go and check on the knowledge magisters and whether or not they had got his item for him or not. He had low hopes for them, but he had already planned a lot of it out. June 4, 1348 of the 5th epoch. Today would be his last day in Tingen, whether he got the ingredient or not. On his way to the knowledge magister's hideout, Max stopped about 2 blocks away and looked into one of the nearby alleys, finding exactly what he was looking for. Bending over, he whispered with a smile, "Hey kid, how would you like to carn 5 pence? This was enough money for his to buy a good slice of beef and have a considerably fulfilling meal for a young child near the age of 5. The child's blue eyes immediately shone as he stood up, quickly dusting off his rags and nodded at Max. Max turned to point at a particular house and said, "You see that blue house with the brown door over there? Yes, that one. All you need to do is go there and knock on the door." Max handed over 1 penny, saying that the rest would be given after the job while waiting for the child, who quickly understood everything and ran towards the house. For such a chaotic world, the children is still just as naive as back on Earth, Max thought to himself as he slowly took more and more steps away from the house, in case the knowledge magisters had been waiting for Max and came rushing out to capture him. This was also why he had employed the child, allowing him to maintain a safe distance from the location of beanders, preferably allowing him to escape to a church or other official beander organization to save his life due to the head start he would have. Unfortunately, despite the child having knocked twice, nobody responded, so Max beckoned the child to return to him. "Since nobody responded, I will give you only 2 more pence. However, if you check if the door is unlocked, and if it is unlocked and you go inside and check for anything or anyone inside, I will give you 5 more pence. So, do you want to do it?" Max asked with a smile, knowing he was likely sending the child to his death, or at least being injured to some extent based on the personalities of the knowledge magisters. They did not seem like bloodthirsty savages, but were also clearly not saints, in the sense of a pure being rather than the beander sequence classification. The child nodded again, accepting the 2 solely, before running towards the house. Twisting the metal handle, the child heard a crisp sound and the door was opened, with no resistance whatsoever. Max then saw the child enter, leaving the door hanging in place as he continued to back away from the house. His heart was racing as he did not know what would happen next, and it would determine if he had to get involved with the official beanders of Tingen or if he would be able to leave peacefully. Time ticked by and Max had already taken 50 steps away from the house, to the point it was already starting to get a little hazy from the mist in the morning air. He had decided to stop here, since the street would start becoming narrower the further back he went, meaning his field of view would also constantly get smaller, and so would his chances of escape. Suddenly, the half-closed door was swung open as the child exited the house, completely unharmed and seemingly holding a bottle and paper in his hands. Elated, Max beckoned for the child to come to him, and the child followed through, but he did not come very close. About 20 steps from each other, the child stopped and looked up at Max, who only seemed around 7 years older than him, and said, "I want 50 solely for this." "Nope," Max stated, his tone not shifting or changing as though he was a robot. 10 solely. "Nope. 20 pence." The child was getting more and more agitated with each passing second, his panic was also becoming visible on his face. He had seen those from the street gangs do this with people in desperate need of something, but he had never seen that person in desperate need acting as though the item meant absolutely nothing to them. He did not know what to do in such a situation. "Nope. F5 pence will do then." "Nope. You tried to bargain. The price of your services has been reduced. 4 pence, take it or leave it." "Oh, okay, here." The child handed the 2 items to Max, who tossed 2 coins to the little child and shooed him off. Although he was not a stingy person, he did not like getting taken advantage of. Samuel's first few years on the job in the original Max's life were filled with being taken advantage of, and he would much rather not live through that. Max did not open either of the items and instead headed directly to Old Man Yux's house. But he did not enter. The little pieces of wood he had stuck into the gap between the door and its frame in multiple locations were still there, meaning either Yuxis had not returned, he wanted it to seem that way, or a third party had intervened. Either way, he did not need to return to his home in Tingen anymore. Not until Klein was about to die and he needed to advance, or he found clues regarding Old Man Yuxis. Either way, he would still prefer to act on those clues after Klein's death and the powerhouses shift their attention from Tingen to Backland. Turning around, his back facing what he had called home since he came to this world, Max left, heading for the train station. Along the way, he purchased all the materials needed for his Sequence 9 potion from the marketplace. He paid 10 solely to the ticket vendor, to get a second-class seat, something that matched his appearance, as well as allowed him to save money for his ventures in Backland. Max sat at his seat, waiting for the rest of the passengers to board the train while looking outside the considerably smaller windows compared to first class. A sense of relief and guilt was washing over him at the moment. relief of finally having left the city that was under a true god and a king of angels' watch, and guilt at having left Old Man Euxis out to hang, even though the old man had done that himself by imprisoning Max using his beander powers. Reactions. At this time, back in Tingen, in a hidden basement of an abandoned house near the outer suburbs of the city, 3 individuals were seated under the dimming light of a gas lamp and the faint sunlight entering through the cracks on the wooden floor of the ground floor above them. Thankfully, nobody was around so nobody would hear or see them. Lucy, I just checked it out, the kid came again and indeed took the item and nothing else. Well, he is more cautious than I thought. He sent a homeless child in his place to get the item, so I could not capture him immediately. The old and skinny man said to the tall redhead while putting away the black clothes he had worn to keep himself hidden. I checked the child's mind, and he only met the boy a few moments before the boy sent him into the house to recover anything inside. He is cautious, the man added, cautious enough to survive in this cruel world we live in. Lancy, the redhead said softly, nodding at the old man's world before turning her attention to the stout man. Lucky, any updates on the boss's situation? Do we know what his mission was? She asked him with a hint of anticipation. Almost. It will still take us another 2 days for the informant to uncover which mission he had accepted from M19. It's not like such information is kept lying around the place just anywhere. Lucky, the stout man shrugged after giving the update, returning to eating his mega sandwich. Good, we will use that to find Cedric. But we have to be careful. The Nighthawks have been getting more and more active recently, and since boss is not here to intervene, if they see us, they will most likely kill us on the spot. She added while turning away from the 2 men, looking at the wall filled with information snippets from newspapers and handwritten notes. Multicolored strings wound around metal pins connected various aspects of the giant mess, creating order among the utter chaos. Her rough hand traveled along one of the blue-colored threads, ultimately landing on a particular article printed on clean white paper with pristine black ink. Archbishop of Evernight Church goes missing. Her finger then moved, following the thread skipping through a series of handwritten conjectures until she reached the end, where the blue thread lay limp, hanging off a metal pin. She took out a handwritten note, applied a small amount of glue to it and stuck it to an empty space on the wall, then picking up a metal pin, and using the back of the metal glue bottle, to hammer it into the wooden wall. Then, she pulled on the blue string and wound it around the metal pin, frowning as she did so. The 2 others noticed her actions, and did not react at first, but when she hammered in the metal pin, it immediately caught their attention as they leaned over to read, a deep frown appearing on their faces as they read it. Unknown sealed artifact of grade 0 missing from Nighthawks. I think it's better if we forget about this one, the old man stuttered as he spoke. Meanwhile the stout man named Lucky just gulped on his saliva, nodding to the old man, sweat already forming on his forehead. Oh Marich, always the worrywart. It's not like we know what the artifact is or how it works. As long as we do not know this, it will also likely not be able to affect us unless we come into contact with it. However, my instincts tell me that this is somehow related to boss's disappearance. She said, turning around to face the old man. A hunter's instincts should not be ignored. The old man could only suppress his worries and nod slightly, sighing deeply to let go of his emotions and focus on collecting himself. After all, strong emotions would make you lose control much faster. This was a universal truth he knew about all pathways. But the child, I have a feeling he is also related to this somehow. Lucy thought to herself, but did not say it out loud, choosing to investigate it further when the time came. Meanwhile, in a house with a red chimney, a white feather quill began writing in a book on its own. The knowledge magisters, who were supposed to have already been captured and killed in a confrontation by the Nighthawks who had only recently found their location, were not. Unknown whether it was due to a stroke of luck or outside influence, the knowledge magisters shifted their base of operations to a more secret and remote hideout. All this happened due to the influence of. All this happened due to the influence of. All this happened. All. As the quill was writing, not only did the crimson moon glow, causing its power to be considerably weakened, but that could not stop it. However, an unknown force kept lifting the tip of the quill off the book every time it tried to complete its statement, until it finally gave up and began writing other stuff, returning to its original course of trying to kill its owner. Unfortunately, their new hideout was coincidentally within the territory of Mr. A of the Aurora Order. In a coincidence, Mr. A's subordinate in Tingen informs him about the knowledge magisters and the vast amounts of knowledge they possess, who then activate members of his organization to capture the knowledge magisters. In this process, the latter stumble into the one and only Inns. This time, the quill was physically interrupted by a hand that prevented it from writing out his full name, as he quickly crossed out his name and wrote another person's name, who he did not like at all. The name he had written was Dunn Smith. After that, he put away the quill and inspected the book where everything was written. He noticed the repetitions that the Grade 0 artifact had undergone, and a shiver went up his spine. Something was interfering with a Grade 0 artifact, without him even noticing. It was best if he left the knowledge magisters alone for the time being. He did not know what had caused this, but he knew one thing for sure: knowing too much or being too greedy for knowledge will lead you to a faster death than you could even imagine. Deciding to ignore this situation, he returned to his normal planning and scheming while remaining shut in the house. Backland and meeting. Choo-choo. The train whistle sounded like a tsunami crashing against flimsy houses as it echoed through the station and into the surroundings, which in this case was the city of Backland. With a population of over 5 million people, this capital of the Leon Kingdom was the most prosperous capital in the southern and northern continents combined. The city itself was divided in two parts by the Tussock River flowing northwest to southeast. The two banks were connected by a large bridge called the Backland Bridge, and multiple ferries that took people through the river to the other side. The colossus of machinery called the steam locomotive pulled itself into the station, spewing black smoke into the air behind it, into the 15 carriages it towed through the rails. Dressed in his white three-piece suit, but with the white jacket folded neatly in his hand, Max got out of his second-class carriage and looked up at the evening sky through the large window in the train station. However, there was a moderately thick smog in the air, making everything seem slightly yellowish despite the lowering sun trying to change it to a tint of red. Visibility was bad, though not as bad as the novel had described it to be. Perhaps it was something that slowly got worse over the course of little more than a year, from now till when Klein arrived in Backland. However, Max was not here to waste time, so he got to walking, making sure to look around him every now and then. As he recalled, there were a lot of pickpockets at the train station and metro stations. If he got robbed, he would have no way of actually recovering his money since he was not yet a beander, and he did not even know what his beander powers did exactly. Although he did know their names and the potion ingredients for them, as well as the rituals, he did not know what exactly their powers could be. He could only guess from the names, but that in itself was vague. After all, his bender sequence might just allow him to bend physical objects temporarily, or it might give him powers like Avatar: The Last Airbender. Or perhaps something better. Swiftly avoiding any shady individuals or children, Maid finally made it out of the train station. He looked over the divided circle known as Backland and made his way to a particular house. On the way, however, he made sure to purchase a newspaper. Unfortunately, it did not have what he wanted, so he searched and bought a few newspapers until he found exactly what he was looking for. Although he knew who he was looking for, Max did not remember his exact address, nor was he sure if it was his private residency or his workplace, so finding the address in the newspaper would be best, and he did. Making his way through the various boroughs, Max discreetly noticed how the houses changed from small apartment buildings to factories, to even smaller apartment buildings and sheds around the Backland Bridge. He continued to walk and the houses gradually became more and more homely, until he finally stopped at his destination. Although he could have traveled through the metro, he preferred not to leave too much of an impression on the people around him for now, and staying in a closed compartment with multiple people staring right at him for many minutes on end was exactly what he was trying to avoid. On the way here, Max had rented out a room in a motel on Alka Street, the border between North Borough and his current location Hillston Borough. In the motel, Max had left his beander sword as well as a sum of money in case he got robbed and needed money. Having a backup was always important. Currently, he was standing in front of a gloomy building where Detective Isengard Stanton worked. Yes, this was the office of the famous Detective Isengard Stanton, who was also secretly a beander who conducted a beander gathering under the alias of Mr. Eye of Wisdom, which doubled as his home as well. It was already evening, but it looked almost night from the darkness outside. Still, Max hoped that the detective was present here today. He did not mind waiting another day to find the man, but what he needed from him was vital for any of his future plans. So, securing it was of absolute importance. Ringing the doorbell, Max patted down his white clothes and fixed his hair, before putting on a fake and slightly childish smile. After all, He was trying to give off the vibes of a child desperately trying for the world to treat him as an adult. The wooden door opened with a strained click, as though the components inside the handle were rusted, but somehow managed to open without any issues, much to the discomfort of Max. A middle-aged gentleman with white sideburns, a thin angular face, and a pristine temperament. He had blue eyes and had a black pipe sticking out from his mouth, but no smoke was coming from it. Clearly, it was not lit, and he had just used it out of habit, or perhaps an odd sense of fashion. He was wearing a white shirt and blue vest, but was not wearing proper footwear. Instead, he was wearing slippers on top of full socks. "What can I do for you, young lad?" Detective Isengard asked politely, halting for a moment to discern what to call Max. Max also smiled a little more genuinely upon hearing himself being called a young lad and not a boy or child, before bowing slightly and speaking. "Are you Detective Isengard? I have a request for you," Max said while pointing at the 2-week-old newspaper with his name on the uncovering of the hideout of a murderer. "Oh, a customer. Please do come in." The detective did not usually take on walk-in cases and generally worked with the Backland police on cases, but the strange boy who wanted to be treated as a mature young man was an intriguing case, something he was willing to invest some time into. As the two of them sat down, Isengard offered some water before speaking in a smooth voice. "Let it be known that I take a consultation fee of £1 for every 30 minutes. With that being said, would you still like to begin our conversation?" "Why, seize, Mr. Isengard Stanton, I would like to commission your services to produce an official identity for me. Before you ask, no, I do not exist in the Leon Empire, anywhere. I was originally from the Intis Republic, but my parents were killed and I was sold as a slave. Yes, but on the way, the Slavers were stopped and killed by the Church of Evernight Believers, who were later killed by people in red robes and superpowers. I was able to escape in the chaos and stumbled into Tingen, where I met a kind old man who took care of me. But only a week ago he went in search of an old friend from his work before he retired apparently, who went missing out of the blue. My old man did not return, so I followed his instructions, took some money from him and escaped Tingen, heading straight to Backland. However, he did not have the means to forge an identity for me, and so he told me if I was ever in Backland, with a much larger population, it would be easier for me to create an identity. I assumed the most famous detective in Backland should be able to help me with my situation, without ripping me off, right? Can you help me, detective?" The middle-aged gentleman took out a matchstick and lit his smoking pipe, taking a deep break of the freshly lit tobacco. He let out a puff of white smoke which slowly dissolved into the surrounding air, causing a strange smell to permeate the room. "All right, young lad, I can help. But it will cost you. Also, detective, could you make sure it is a somewhat respectable identity from a slightly rich background? I intend on starting up or at least investing in other businesses to make a living. So please make it something suitable." Isengard looked at the child in front of him and immediately felt as though his character was more interesting than he had initially thought. Preparations for potion. Max left Detective Isengard's office with a slight smile on his face, and he kept walking until he was somewhat far away from the office-house combination. Immediately, his smile disappeared and a frown replaced it. No, he was not in any way dissatisfied with the detective's professionalism, nor the amount quoted or the promise of having it ready within 20 days. He was in fact rather happy with how everything turned out, with him only paying £2 as advanced payment, and having to pay the full amount of £28 when he returned to have his photograph taken for the identity papers. In fact, Mr. Eye of Wisdom had also thrown in a birth certificate and the death certificates of his parents for free since Max had not haggled one bit to lower the price. He said it was all part of the package for a potential future customer. Max was instead frowning because he now had to brew his potion and turn it into a beander as soon as possible. Thankfully he had all the necessary items except those for the ritual, and that was where he was headed now, Dunham's department store. It was a particular store that sold almost anything and everything you could think of, but it also marketed up the price by around 1–10% depending on how expensive the item was, with the more expensive the item, the less the markup. They called it a fee of convenience, and the very fact that it was still in operation meant that its business strategy was working out. Max got to know about this particular store while he was on the train. One of the passengers was apparently related to the owner of the store somehow, and could not stop how his family had rapidly risen to the middle class of the Leon Empire due to that one store. And considering he had bought a second-class ticket, it might not even have been far off from the truth. Max did not leave Hillston and just kept walking around as the sun was slowly setting in the distance, asking people now and then about the location of the shop. Thankfully, he finally found it before it became nighttime and it closed down. Looking around, Max picked up a large glass jug, a wooden ladle that was small enough to be considered a chopstick, and a wooden board similar to the ones used for chopping vegetables. Max also picked up 2 other wood sheets. Finally, after looking around until almost closing time, Max found his final item and grinned. Purchasing all the materials needed for his ritual and potion making, Max left the department store with an intrigued expression. He had realized just how convenient this shop was, and how much market potential it had. Almost immediately, Max had put this store as one of his potential investment options due to the fact that for his items, he had paid almost £1 for all his items, which was a very large amount, even putting aside that a large portion of this price came from the last item he had bought that had the lowest convenience fee. Leaving the store, Max headed straight for his room that he had rented near the end of Hillston. Being the financial, business, and economic center of the Lowen Kingdom, it was where the Backland Stock Exchange, Clearing House, Future Center, and the 7 major banks' headquarters. As such, unlike other parts of Backland, the Hillston stayed open for much longer, with people still busy with their jobs despite the sun having almost set. From what he knew, even into the early night, the Hillston would not be any less active. Max already knew that he would not be able to complete his ritual at night, but he also knew he could not do it during the day since anything could go wrong with it. Thus, he decided to just wait for a day. Making sure the beander sword was properly sealed away, Max went to sleep and did not encounter any strange visions or dreams after a long period of having nightmares and having the beander sword trying to kill him non-stop. June 5, 1348 of the 5th epoch. It was a busy morning in Hillston as people quickly got up and to work, though not as busy as Empress with all the nobility from all over Leon gathering to throw parties and banquets to socialize. Though that was not a part of Backland Max would be visiting, or even want to be visiting anytime soon. Max got up and the first thing he did was extend his stay at the hotel, which did not seem half bad other than the terrible food they made, before returning to his room to begin the preparation for his portion and ritual. The potion formula did not state any heating up of the potion or its ingredients during any part of the process, but it did tell him to crush the yellow birth tree root as well as the blue-tailed sea bass's eye into a paste before adding it to the potion. Thus, Max took the cheap yet hard maple mortar and pestle he had purchased from the department store, along with all the other items he needed in a suitcase and left the motel, heading straight for the woods outside Backland City. Thankfully, today was a Sunday, so despite being a very busy day in Hillston and especially Empress the rest of Backland had taken a backseat as a lot of shops and houses were closed and a lot of people had decided to sleep in on their day off. Of course, the factorics were still working, churning out finished and semi-finished goods, pushing out as much smoke and soot into the air as possible. Being a Sunday, the carriage fares were a little higher than normal, but Max did not mind as he left Backland in a carriage. On the way, however, he told the driver to stop near a denser part of the jungle. Paying the carriage his fare, as well as some extra, Max told the driver to stay if he could since Max only needed to use the washroom really badly, and it was not the liquid kind. He told the driver that he would pay him by the hour and just like that, he ended up renting the carriage on an hourly basis. Of course, he did not stupidly hand over the full 5 soldi, and instead only handed the driver 2 soldi, saying that he would get the rest once they reached their destination. Entering the woods, Max gradually increased his speed since he had to make it seem like a reasonable time period for someone who needed to take a sh*t. Soon, he reached a slight clearing in the forest which was perfectly surrounded by trees on all sides, such that it was mostly hidden from outsiders unless they came within a 3-tree distance from Max, at which point he would also notice them. Quickly, he pulled out the mortar and pestle and began crushing the yellow birth tree root as well as the blue-tailed sea bass eye, one at a time before adding them to a small mixing pot. Then he added 100 milliliters of distilled water and stirred for a while using the chopstick ladle, before finally adding 2 drops of 21% sulfuric acid which he diluted from the highly concentrated stuff he had purchased back in Tingen. Stirring it more and more, the mixture gradually turned thicker and thicker until it became the consistency of toothpaste, but with an expectantly horrid color and smell. Placing the lid and screwing it into the container to prevent it from accidentally falling over while he made the preparations for the ritual. He placed one wood board on the ground, before placing some nearby rocks below it only on one side, creating a gradient of sorts. Using a lever, Max tested that it was indeed pushing the wind up and creating a sort of dead zone right behind it, with just some random bits of chaotic turbulence making their way down there. 1 down, 2 to go. He took the large glass beaker and put his remaining distilled water, as well as all the other water he had brought in water bottles here, into it. Then he took a thin metal tube that was bent into a V shape in the middle and submerged it into the water until all air was gone. Using his fingers, he plugged both ends of it and pulled it out of the water. Ensuring nothing was leaking, Max placed it like an inverted V on the edge of the beaker, with one end submerged in water, while the other was hanging off the edge on the outside. Looking up into the sky, Max made sure that the sun was nice and bright before letting go, and immediately a smooth and narrow flow of water streamed out of the pipe and into the ground, where it briefly collected due to surface tension until it finally recognized the natural tilt in the landscape and began flowing in a particular direction. Max picked up a wood panel and shoved it into the dirt at an angle, cutting off the water's path yet allowing it to flow in a different direction smoothly. Last one, Max took out the item that had cost him the most at the department store from his right breast pocket. It was a silver-rimmed crystal monocle. Placing it such that it focused the sunlight onto a point, but not enough to create fire, Max used some rocks in his bag to stabilize the monocle before finally turning his attention back to his potion. He picked it up with grace yet a hint of trepidation, but ultimately nodded internally, opened the lid, and put the container to his lips. Taking the potion was in no way smooth and refreshing. Instead, it was slightly warmer than room temperature, and was full of a rough, grainy texture. Max resisted the urge to vomit as his body reflexively tried to reject the food. It was astounding how intelligent one's body truly was. From the large organs like the stomach knowing what food would be good or bad for it just based on the taste and texture in the mouth, down to the very tiny white blood cells knowing which cells are foreign and attacking them with more precision than an MQ-9 Reaper. However, Max did not bother chewing on it, and swallowed it with his eyes closed like he was taking in an extremely bitter medicine, just not something that would, in any way, be beneficial to his health other than giving him power and the ability to survive in this world. The liquid did heat up a bit in his mouth to slowly match the temperature of his body. It flowed without any disturbances straight into his stomach. Unlike what Klein experienced, Max did not feel it spread in cool tentacles all across his body. Instead, he felt the liquid become smaller and smaller, condensing into a smaller size within his stomach with each second until he could not feel it any longer. Boom! Suddenly, a wave of heat originated from the location of the disappeared ball of liquid from his stomach, and spread all over his body as though an explosion had occurred. Max felt the head burn through his entire body until it reached his toes, fingertips and his scalp, before rebounding and heading back to his stomach. Immediately, Max could no longer remain standing as he fell to the ground in pain, convulsing every time the heat rebounded in his stomach to head back out, and then again when it rebounded at the ends of his body to head back inwards. The cycle repeated 10 times before it finally stopped and Max opened his eyes and let out a breath of relief. However, all color from his surroundings rapidly drained, becoming nothing more than black and white. Max did not have time to think about how different this was compared to Klein's spirit vision that saturated all the colors around him. The simple reason for this was due to the sudden changes occurring all over his body. His mouth, which he had just opened to let out a breath, suddenly widened as it began to split his skin and muscles, extending from one ear to the other. Inside were rows upon rows of mangled yet incredibly sharp and white teeth, looping around in circles all along his mouth and down his throat. To an outsider, it may have appeared like Max could swallow anything and completely destroy it. His hands and legs split up into innumerable tentacles as his body began to lose its structure, with his bones slowly vanishing, replaced by strong muscles which could move the body almost just as well but could not provide enough support for it to maintain its shape. Max was right now just a pool of tentacles and teeth. Suddenly, his 2 eyes also began to multiply, changing color from his original red into pure black, with no white remaining, only nothingness. Compared to the losing control of others, who felt their minds being split or taken over by other entities, Max was feeling himself slowly enter the embrace of nothingness, returning to the original state of unending nothingness before the true creator had created the world. He could feel his thoughts gradually slow down and his body movements were also slowing down. However, it was now that the ritual came into effect as Max suddenly felt 3 chains piercing his gradually failing mind and yank it back into his body, returning his bodily functions, as well as the speed of his mind. The three concepts, despite being physical objects, were still concepts within that Max had shifted. One could think of it in various ways. For the wind, Max had bent its path, flow, direction, speed, velocity, turbulence, and many other things. The same went for the water. As for the sunlight, Max had changed its density, its concentration, its direction, the energy it could give out as heat and light, and many other concepts. Thus, he had successfully bent three concepts, resulting in them pulling back his mind from losing control at the moment of ingesting the potion. His body rapidly returned to normal, but Max's vision was still completely black and white, and it was giving him a headache. Max quickly did what he had spent quite some time during his week of rest in Tingen trying to remember, what old Neil had told Max on how to deactivate the spirit vision. Well, despite his spirit vision being different, Max tried to do the same. He grasped the crystal monocle he had in his hand and tried to clear his mind of all thoughts other than that monocle. After a while of clearing all his thoughts, he successfully returned his vision to normal and took in a deep breath. It was unfortunate that he needed to maintain his concentration in order to keep the spirit vision deactivated, but there was nothing he could do. Max slowly stood up and checked his body. There were not too many changes other than his height increasing by a bit, indicated by the extra pair of casual clothes he had worn on the journey here becoming about 2 inches shorter than normal. Right now, Max could easily pass for a proper 15-year-old. He quickly pulled out a mirror from his bag and checked himself. His face had matured quite a bit, and the scar on his eye had also somehow faded slightly, thought it was still very easily visible. Most importantly, however, his crimson eyes now had become slightly darker, slower to a maroon than red. However, the change was not easily visible unless someone deliberately looked at you for a long period of time. Max nodded in satisfaction at not having his body deformed as a side effect of consuming the potion and quickly packed up everything back into his bag to not leave any evidence of his existence here. He also made sure to scan the area for anything he left behind before leaving, swiftly returning to the carriage, who was thankfully still waiting for him. It had only been around 15 minutes since he ventured into the woods for his bowel cleansing, which was not too long for a person in this era. In fact, it was not too long for a person in any era. Max went on the carriage and went to the top of a nearby hill, which was his original destination as an excuse to get the carriage driver to bring him along. Up here, he once again paid the driver for the time till now and sat down for a nice cup of tea to enjoy the view using some firewood he had brought with him to heat the water before adding the tea leaves. After a bit of relaxing and getting used to his new body with some light stretching and warm-up, Max took the carriage back to Backland where he paid him the full amount and returned to his motel. Once back at his motel, Max finally relaxed a little as he had been tense the whole time, hoping not to suddenly lose control and turn back into whatever it was that he had become while consuming the potion. I should check out my mythical creature form, Max thought to himself as he got back up and walked to the slightly rusted and moldy mirror. He then let his thoughts get flooded by countless other things while forgetting about the monocle. Next, he also thought about the world's memories of his life and his strongest emotions, all while remembering how he was powerless to stop the old man from leaving just like that. Looking at the mirror, Max noticed that some parts of his body had turned from his normal light color to a much darker shade and their shape had also deformed greatly. He could not make out the color since everything was black and white, but it still looked horrendous. Max also noticed his mouth becoming wider and wider with his teeth becoming sharper but also bending in random directions, while his eyes began to split into more eyes, and his thoughts began to gradually slow down. Second this, Max quickly recalled the monocle and cancelled his spirit vision, while also recalling the feeling of his ritual bringing back his thought process to normal, while also returning his body to normal. Within just 2 seconds, Max was back, though he was breathing heavily as though he had seen a ghost. He was not suddenly terrified of his mythical form, though it was considerably disgusting. It was not enough to make him this scared. No, what he was actually concerned about was the vision he saw when he almost lost control just now. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.